The radiator hissed differently on rainy days. Alex had lived in the building long enough to know its moods, the way the pipes complained before winter storms, the ghost marks on the lobby walls where old signs used to hang, the faint smell that didn't belong anywhere near their landlocked city, salt and seaweed, drifting from the back stairwell that nobody used anymore. Their mum said it was just mould, but mould didn't smell like the ocean, and it didn't make the air feel different, heavier somehow, like breathing through years instead of space. The building was dying. That's what the notices said, taped to every floor in crisp corporate language about modern renovations and improved living standards. What they meant was gutting. What they meant was erasing everything weird and old and layered, replacing it with the kind of clean that had no memory. The work would start at summer's end, and everyone knew what came after renovations like these: rent hikes, buyouts, the slow bleed of neighbours who couldn't afford to stay. Alex's mum fought about it constantly with the landlord, her voice carrying through their apartment's thin walls until Alex couldn't stand it anymore. That's how they ended up in the back stairwell that evening, right as sunset turned the hallway windows orange. The stairwell was colder than the rest of the building, its stone steps worn smooth as river rocks, each one stamped with a number that made no sense: 1912, 1945, 1973, 1989. Years, maybe, though they didn't correspond to any floor Alex knew. At the bottom landing, built into the wall behind cracked protective glass, sat a large sandglass. The sand inside was frozen mid-fall, suspended like time holding its breath. Alex had passed it 1,000 times without really looking. But that evening, hiding from raised voices and construction notices, they stopped and stared. The glass was old, genuinely old, not vintage store old. The frame was brass gone green with age, decorated with symbols that might have been letters in some other alphabet. Absent-mindedly, while their mum's voice echoed somewhere above, Alex reached out and touched it. The brass hummed under their palm. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low vibration that travelled up their arm and settled in their chest. The sand in the glass shifted, gave one soft rushing whisper, then stopped again. Alex pulled their hand back, heart suddenly hammering. Nothing else happened. The stairwell stayed cold and dim. After a moment, feeling foolish, they started climbing, counting steps without thinking, until their foot landed on the tread marked 1912. The stone beneath their sneaker vibrated. The sand in the glass below gave that rushing sound again, louder now, continuous. Alex looked up at the nearest fire door, the one that should open onto the 3rd floor, and something in their gut said it wouldn't. Wouldn't open onto their floor anyway. They pushed it open. Gaslight flickered in brass fixtures along a hallway that was the same shape as the one they knew but completely different. The walls were covered in heavy floral wallpaper, dark and lush. The air smelled like real ocean, like salt water and fish markets, and faintly of coal smoke. A woman in a long skirt and impossibly high collar walked past, giving Alex an odd look, probably at their hoodie and jeans, but saying nothing. At the end of the hall, someone was playing piano, real and immediate, not through walls or speakers. Alex's breath came too fast. They backed through the fire door, letting it slam, and nearly fell down the stairs in their panic. The stairwell looked the same. No, not quite the same. The walls were cleaner here, the stone less worn. The sand glass was still humming, its sand falling in a steady stream now. Alex didn't think, just ran down, counting steps backward, trying to match the number they'd climbed. When they reached the bottom landing, gasping, they slapped their hand against the brass frame. The sand stopped falling. Everything went quiet. Alex shoved through the door and stumbled into their own time. Flickering LED bulbs, peeling beige paint, a construction notice taped to someone's door. Their legs gave out and they sat hard on the linoleum, shaking. It took 3 days before they went back. 3 days of telling themselves they'd imagined it, that they'd had some kind of episode, that the stress of the renovation was getting to everyone. But the ocean smell was still there in the stairwell, and the sand glass sat frozen and waiting, and Alex couldn't stop thinking about that hallway with its gaslight and wallpaper, about the building when it was new and fancy and full of people who belonged to a different century. They tested it carefully. Bottom landing, hand on the frame, climbed to a marked year. The sand would start falling. Open any door at that level, step into that year. To get back, find the stairwell in that time, descend the exact same number of steps, touch the frame before the sand ran out. If the sand emptied before they made it back, Alex didn't want to think about what happened. There were warnings scratched into the stone, half legible in different handwritings. Count careful and sand don't lie, and stuck in 54 for 3 days don't fuck up. At first it was just exploration, just the thrill of being somewhere impossible. Alex slipped into 1973 and found the building loud and alive, full of families and artists and arguments that spilled into hallways. The stairwell walls were covered in murals, still wet in places, and a girl about Alex's age was adding to them with a brush, her hands covered in paint. She looked up when Alex appeared. "You from the 5th floor?" she asked, like Alex appearing out of nowhere was normal. Third. I'm Alex." "Rosa." She went back to painting, adding turquoise waves to what looked like a city underwater. "You going to tell me that's ugly too? My mum says it's vandalism." "It's not ugly." Alex moved closer, watching the paint flow. "It's perfect." Rosa smiled without looking away from the wall. "See, some people get it." Alex visited 1989 next and got pulled into a rooftop party, all spray paint and loud music, the city skyline sharp against the night. A young man with blazing red hair and a guitar was leading everyone in a song Alex didn't recognise. Someone introduced him as Danny Chen, and it took Alex a minute to place him. Mr. Chen, who lived on the 4th floor now, old and quiet and always reading by his window. This version of him was on fire, all energy and punk attitude, and when he caught Alex watching, he grinned and played louder. In 1965, Alex found their own apartment being used as a communal kitchen, full of people cooking together, arguing about politics and music and whether the building manager was going to finally fix the water pressure. The noise and warmth made the present-day silence feel hollow by comparison. Each time Alex returned, they felt the weight of what was going to be erased. The renovation plans would gut all of this. The layers, the paint, the scratches and dents and stories. They'd turn it into something clean and expensive and empty. The changes started small. After a trip to 1923, where Alex had to force a stuck door open and let it slam behind them, they came home to find the same door in the present, suddenly sporting a deep scuff in the wood that hadn't been there that morning. Their mum didn't remember it. Neither did Mr. Chen, but it was there, solid and real. When Alex brushed too close to Rosa's mural in 1973, turquoise paint streaked across their sleeve. Back in the present, that same streak of turquoise appeared on the stairwell wall as old, faded graffiti, like it had been aging there for 50 years. Alex ran their fingers over it, heart pounding. No one else seemed to notice it was new. To everyone else, it had always been there. After helping a young couple carry a heavy trunk through the lobby in 1941, they were moving in, excited and nervous, and talking about getting married once he shipped out. Alex returned to find a framed black and white photo hanging in the present-day lobby. The couple stood by the trunk, formal and young, under a small plaque reading, "Long-term residence 1940s. The building manager mentioned it to Alex's mum a few days later. Something about finding it in storage. Wasn't it charming? Added character to the place. Alex's trips weren't just visits. They were stitching pieces of those eras into the building's present, making them real, making them permanent. Once they understood, Alex grew bolder. They warned a kid in 1965 away from a window with a visible crack, and when they got back, that pane had a modern safety sticker and reinforced corners. They traded mixtapes with a teenager in 1989, and suddenly the old mailroom had a built-in shelf labelled Heritage Cassette Tapes, building soundtrack through the decades, with neat little cards explaining their historical significance. The problem was the developers loved it. Every new historic feature that appeared became a selling point. The marketing brochures started mentioning authentic period details and documented cultural heritage. Rents crept up because the building was now full of character. Alex watched tenants grumble about the rent hikes and felt sick. They'd been trying to preserve the building's soul, but all they'd done was give the renovators ammunition to justify turning it into expensive nostalgia. Alex's mum was counting on the relocation payout. She'd already started looking at apartments farther out, places they could actually afford. Mr. Chen said he wouldn't survive another move, that he'd lived in this building since the 80s and he'd die before he let some corporation push him out. A kid from downstairs, Jay, had started treating the stairwell like a playground, and Alex had to keep chasing them away before they accidentally touched the sandglass at the wrong moment. In the past, Alex's visits were getting complicated too. Rosa asked why Alex only showed up for a few minutes at a time, why their clothes were always strange. Young Mr. Chen, Danny, wanted to know if Alex would come to their next show, and Alex had to explain they couldn't. Not really, they were just passing through. A single father in the 70s asked Alex to watch his daughter for an hour while he went to a tenant meeting, and Alex did, playing with the kid in the hallway while time literally ran out grain by grain in the sandglass below. Every intervention, every kindness, every warning rippled forward. The building in the present kept shifting, kept gaining layers, and the renovation plans kept adapting, the developers getting smarter about how to market it, how to use the history Alex was creating as a weapon against the people who actually lived there. The breaking point came during a trip to the rooftop during wartime. Alex had climbed to a step marked with a year during the 40s when air raid sirens were still a real threat. The rooftop was under blackout rules, dark except for starlight, and someone was up there carving words into the parapet with a nail. An older woman, her hands scarred and steady. She didn't look up when Alex approached. "You're one of the stairwalkers," she said, still carving. What? "We know about the stairs. Some of us, the ones who pay attention." She finished a letter and started the next. "Been leaving messages for whoever comes after, so they know we were here, so they know someone gave a damn." Alex read the words taking shape, "To those who keep the stairs alive for us." When Alex returned to the present, those same words were there on the parapet, weathered and old, green with age. And the latest renovation update had changed. The developers had decided to preserve the iconic stairwell as a heritage feature, while converting the rest of the building into luxury units. They were going to use the stairwell Alex had been, protecting as the centerpiece of their marketing campaign, gut everything else, and price everyone out. Alex sat on their apartment floor and cried. They'd made it worse. Every trip, every touch, every piece of history they'd tried to save had just made the building more valuable to people who didn't care about the actual people who lived in it. The ocean smell in the stairwell grew stronger. The sandglass, when Alex checked, had less sand in the top chamber than before. Not by much, but noticeably less. Like each journey drew from some finite supply. The building in all times was becoming a palimpsest. Layers overlapping, 70s paint under 90s graffiti under modern safety stickers, a wartime dent in the banister next to a security camera that seemed to have always been there but definitely hadn't existed last month. Alex started noticing themselves in the layers too. Their sneaker print in an old photo of the third-floor hallway, dated to the 60s. A blurry figure in a lobby picture from the 80s that looked exactly like Alex in their favourite hoodie. An old tenant ledger in the building office listing A. Rivera, in a year that didn't make sense, a year before Alex was born. They were becoming part of the building's permanent history, stitched into every era they touched. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like responsibility settling onto their shoulders. They couldn't just keep adding layers. They had to choose what history the building would carry forward. Alex made a plan. It was risky and probably stupid, but they were out of other options. They would make one last series of trips carefully chosen to plant a specific legacy, not decorative, not marketable, but legally and socially binding. Then they'd let the sandglass empty and seal the stairwell for good. They climbed to steps that marked crucial years, the year the building's ownership papers were first filed, the year rent control laws were debated in City Hall, the year a tenants' association almost formed but fell apart over internal disputes. In each time, Alex found the people who mattered. Rosa, young Danny Chen, the hotel manager who ran the building in the 50s, the single father from the 70s, and they nudged. Carefully. In 1912, Alex helped the building's first superintendent understand that including community input in management decisions would make the building more stable long-term. They left a pamphlet about cooperative housing on his desk, carefully aged to look period-appropriate. In the 50s, Alex talked to the hotel manager about documenting tenant histories, about keeping records of who lived there and for how long. They helped organise photographs, suggested creating a residence archive. The manager thought it was a lovely idea, very sentimental. In 1973, Rosa was already angry about rent hikes and landlord neglect. Alex didn't have to push hard to get her interested in tenant organising. They just had to listen, to encourage, to mention that documents and photographs and written records mattered, that history was evidence. In 1989, Danny Chen's band was popular enough that he had some local influence. Alex suggested he use it, do a benefit show for tenant rights, get people thinking about community ownership. Danny liked the idea. He said it was punk as hell. Each time Alex descended back through the stairwell, more subtle changes overlaid the present. A faded plaque appeared in the lobby about a historic tenants' union founded in the 70s. A shelf of archived newsletters materialised in the mailroom, documenting decades of resident advocacy. Legal language about protected long-term residents and documented community investment started appearing in the management office files, old papers that had apparently always been there, filed by generations of tenants who'd cared enough to make their presence official. The last trip was the most dangerous. Alex climbed to a step marked with a year in the near future, after the renovation date. They needed to see what would happen if they failed. The door opened onto polished concrete floors and cold glass walls, a few exposed brick sections carefully preserved for aesthetic value. The stairwell was still there, roped off behind velvet cords with a plaque explaining its historical significance. The ocean smell was gone, replaced by air freshener and new carpet. The hallways were silent, not with the comfortable silence of home, but with the empty silence of a hotel. None of their neighbours were here. None of the layered, messy, lived-in feeling remained. Alex found the Sandglass in this future stairwell. It was almost empty, just a few grains left in the top chamber. They'd pushed it too far, used too much of whatever finite time stuff it contained. They ran, down the stairs, counting frantically, trying to descend the exact number of steps. The sand fell grain by grain. Alex's legs burned. They couldn't remember if they'd climbed 15 steps or 16. Couldn't remember if they'd started from the bottom landing or one up. The last grains fell. Alex hit the bottom landing and slammed their hand against the brass frame, praying. The world lurched. The door opened. Alex fell through onto linoleum and fluorescent light and their own time, their own building, everything slightly dizzy like dust finally settling after being shaken. Over the next few weeks, the renovation plans changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually, grinding against resistance that hadn't existed before. The building had too many documented protections now, too much recognised heritage of community ownership and tenant advocacy. The Historical Society got involved because of the archives. Former residents came forward with stories and photographs, all carefully organised in those newsletters that had always existed. Legal challenges appeared, citing 50-year-old documents about community investment rights and resident protections. The developers couldn't just flip it into luxury condos anymore. The paperwork was too tangled, the history too official. They pivoted to a slower, more modest rehab plan. Existing tenants would be protected. Rents would increase, but gradually, within legal limits. The building would be updated but not gutted. Alex's mum got to stay. So did Mr. Chen. So did everyone else who'd been terrified of losing their home. The stairwell remained strange and layered, a visible palimpsest of graffiti and carvings and repaired cracks and plaques. But the Sandglass was different now. The sand had fused, turned to solid glass like time had stopped travelling there. The ocean smell lingered, faint and permanent, but the humming sensation was gone. When Alex touched the brass frame, nothing happened. The stairwell was sealed, its work done. Alex walked the steps with Jay one evening at sunset, telling stories about the building back in the day, the jazz bar in the 40s, the rooftop parties in the 80s, the murals and the music and the people who'd lived and fought here. Jay asked if it was all true, if Alex had really seen it. Yeah, Alex said, I was there. At the bottom landing, Alex ran their hand over the carved years on each tread. The building wasn't a place they could visit in different times anymore. It was a single, complex home where every era they'd touched now coexisted. Layered like sediment, all the stories compressed into one ongoing story. The stairwell had become a physical memory of everyone who'd ever lived there, and everyone who'd refused to leave quietly, including a teenager who'd learned you can't save everything, but you can choose which histories you're willing to carry into the future. Alex looked at the frozen Sandglass, at the years carved into stone steps, at Jay's excited face asking more questions about the old days. "Come on," Alex said. "I'll show you the archive in the mailroom. There's photos and everything. We're all in there." They climbed back up together, Alex's hand trailing along the banister that was dented from wartime and graffitied from the 80s and polished smooth by decades of touch. The building creaked around them, its radiators hissing, its memories alive and permanent in every layer. Home, messy and preserved, one careful intervention at a time. The mailroom smelled like old paper and dust, but in a good way, like a library that had earned its character. The shelf of cassette tapes sat where Alex had helped create it, along with 3 cardboard boxes labelled in fading marker. Building archives, handle with care. Jay immediately started pulling out photographs, spreading them across the sorting table like treasure. "Is this really Mr. Chen?" Jay held up a photo of Danny with his red hair and guitar, surrounded by people on the rooftop, all of them young and defiant and alive. "Yeah, he was in a band. They were pretty good from what I heard. He never told me that." Jay's voice carried a note of betrayal, like Mr. Chen had been holding out on them. "Maybe you should ask him about it." Alex picked up another photo, this one from the 40s, and felt their chests tighten. The young couple with the trunk, both of them smiling at the camera like they had all the time in the world. The man had shipped out a week after that photo was taken, according to the notes Alex had found on another trip. He'd made it back, though. They'd lived in the building for 40 years, raised 3 kids, left behind these photographs, and a legacy of paid rent and community potlucks, and small kindnesses that had rippled forward through decades. "Who are they?" Jay asked, looking over Alex's shoulder. "The Kowalskis. They moved in during the war. They're why we have the community garden on the roof. She started it in the 50s and it just kept going." "How do you know all this?" Alex set the photo down carefully. "The archives. And Mr. Chen tells stories if you ask him right. And my mum remembers some of it. You just have to pay attention." It wasn't exactly a lie. The stories were real, even if Alex's access to them had been unusual. Over the next few weeks, the archives became Jay's obsession. They'd drag Alex down to the mailroom after school, sorting through photographs and newsletters, asking questions about every face and every note. Jay wanted to know everything. Who lived where, what the building looked like before the carpet in the 3rd-floor hallway, why there was a weird patch of different tile in the lobby. Alex answered what they could, carefully, always framing it as something they'd read or heard, rather than something they'd witnessed firsthand. Mr. Chen started joining them sometimes, moving slowly with his cane, settling into the old chair someone had dragged down for him. He'd pick up photos and tell stories, his voice thin but steady, about the punk scene in the 80s, about the friends he'd had, about the way the city used to feel before everything got expensive and sterile. He didn't ask how Alex knew things about his past that they shouldn't, just gave Alex long, considering looks sometimes, like he was seeing something that confirmed a suspicion he'd been nursing. "You've got an old soul," he said once, after Jay had run upstairs to grab something. "Or maybe just an old building soul. Same thing in a place like this." Alex didn't know what to say to that, so they just nodded. Rosa's mural was still in the stairwell, faded but visible, the turquoise waves still moving across the wall in their frozen dance. Alex had learned, through careful research disguised as curiosity, that Rosa had become a well-known local artist, had painted murals all over the city before dying in the early 2000s. Some of her work was in museums now, but this one, this underwater city in the stairwell, was her first. At least, that's what the new plaque said, the one that had appeared on the wall next to the painting, after Alex's trips. The plaque didn't mention that Alex had been there when Rosa painted it, had told her it was perfect, had maybe given her the confidence to keep going. The renovations, when they finally started, were nothing like the original plans. The construction crew worked floor by floor, updating electrical and plumbing but keeping the bones of the place intact. They reinforced the stairwell, cleaned Rosa's mural carefully, refinished the worn steps without removing the carved years. The building manager, a new one, hired as part of the compromise, consulted the archives for every decision, trying to preserve what mattered while making the building livable for another century. Alex's mum stopped looking at apartments in distant neighbourhoods. She started attending the newly reformed Tenants Association meetings instead, held in the community room that had been converted from an old storage space nobody remembered existed, until the archives documented it. The meetings were loud and contentious and full of people who cared too much to stay quiet, and Alex would sit in the back doing homework while neighbours argued about pest control and heating systems and how to keep the building affordable without letting it fall apart. Mr. Chen passed away in early spring, quietly in his sleep, which everyone agreed was the best way. His nephew came to clean out the apartment and found boxes of old photographs, flyers from punk shows, cassette tapes recorded in somebody's living room in 1989. The nephew donated most of it to the building archives, said his uncle would have wanted it to stay where it belonged. Alex helped sort through it, carefully not crying in front of Jay, and found a photo they'd never seen before. The rooftop party in 1989, Danny Chen playing guitar with his red hair blazing, and in the background, slightly blurred, a figure in a hoodie that looked exactly like Alex. The photo had been in Danny's possession this whole time. He'd kept it, even though he couldn't possibly have understood what it meant. Or maybe he had. Maybe he'd understood better than Alex gave him credit for. They added the photo to the archives and didn't mention it to anyone. Summer came, and with it the end of the renovation work. The building threw a party, an actual party, organised by the Tenants Association, with people from every era of the building's history showing up. Former residents who'd moved away but still cared, children of people who'd lived there decades ago, even a few artists who'd known Rosa back in the 70s and wanted to see her mural properly preserved. Alex stood on the rooftop as sunset turned the sky orange and gold, watching Jay run around with a disposable camera, documenting everything the way the building had taught them to value documentation. The community garden was in full bloom, tomatoes and herbs and flowers all tangled together. The carved words on the parapet were still there, cleaned and protected now, visible to anyone who looked. To those who keep the stairs alive for us. Someone had added new words below them, carved more recently, and to those who answer. Alex didn't remember carving those words. Hadn't carved them, wouldn't have carved them. But they were there anyway, part of the building's permanent record now, and Alex had learned that the building had its own ways of keeping score, of acknowledging debts and contributions. They'd changed the past, and the past had changed them back. And somewhere in all that mutual alteration, the building had decided Alex belonged to its history as much as anyone else who'd ever lived there. The sandglass in the stairwell would never move again, its sand frozen in glass, permanent and unchanging. But the ocean smell was still there, faint and inexplicable, a reminder that some things didn't need to make sense to be real. Alex visited the stairwell sometimes late at night when the building was quiet and sat on the bottom landing with their hand on the brass frame, not trying to activate it, just touching it, feeling the coolness of the metal and the weight of all the years it had witnessed. They thought about Rosa sometimes, wondered if she'd ever noticed that Alex only appeared in short bursts, wondered if she'd understood. They thought about Danny Chen and his red hair and his punk rock dreams. They thought about the Kowalskis and their trunk, about the single father and his daughter, about all the people who'd lived in this building and loved it and fought for it in their own ways across decades and decades of slow, accidental history. The building was home now in a way it hadn't been before, not just because Alex lived there, but because Alex had helped make it, layer by layer, choosing which stories to preserve and which legacies to carry forward. The renovations hadn't erased the past. They'd just added another layer to the palimpsest, another chapter in the ongoing story of people refusing to be erased. Late that night, after the party had ended and everyone had gone home, Alex found Jay sitting in the stairwell looking at Rosa's mural. "It's really beautiful," Jay said quietly. "I wish I could have met her." "Me too," Alex said, which was both true and false in ways Jay would never understand. "Do you think the building is happy now? That we saved it?" Alex considered the question. The building creaked around them, settling into itself, its radiators beginning their nightly symphony of hisses and clanks. Somewhere above, someone laughed. Somewhere below, a door closed. The ocean smell drifted past, salt and seaweed and impossibility. "I think the building is what it's always been," Alex said finally. "A place where people live and fight and refuse to give up. We just made sure it stays that way." Jay nodded, satisfied with that answer, and they sat together in the stairwell as night settled over the city. The sandglass gleamed dully in the dim light, its purpose fulfilled, its magic spent, but the years carved into each step remained, permanent markers of time passing and time preserved, of moments that mattered enough that someone had bothered to write them down. Alex stood eventually, helping Jay up, and they climbed the stairs together to their separate floors. Alex's hand trailed along the banister, touching the wartime dent and the graffiti and the smooth, worn patches, feeling all the history compressed into this single spiral of stone and brass and determination. Home, they thought, layered and complicated and real, exactly the way it should be. The next story is about to begin, please relax and enjoy. The camera sat in Grandpa's old trunk like a relic from another life, wrapped in a faded darkroom cloth that still smelled faintly of chemicals. Lena lifted it out carefully, turning it over in her hands. It was a Polaroid, not one of the modern reproductions, but an actual vintage model, heavy and solid. Beneath it she found a single pack of film labelled in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. Tomorrow roll. That's weird, she muttered, setting the film aside to examine a folded note tucked into the camera's leather case. The paper was yellowed, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges. 11:11 is when the day admits what it's going to be. Her mum's voice drifted up from downstairs, asking if she'd found anything worth keeping. Lena didn't answer. She'd been avoiding most of Mum's questions lately, hiding behind her regular camera, scrolling through shots on her phone instead of sitting at the dinner table. It was easier than watching her mum's face crumple every time someone mentioned Grandpa. She loaded the tomorrow roll into the camera. It clicked into place with surprising ease, like it had been waiting, and brought it downstairs to her bedroom. Her walls were plastered with prints, street scenes with motion blur, close-ups of rust patterns on fire escapes, a series of Noah pulling increasingly ridiculous faces. Her portfolio felt stuck lately, every shot a copy of something she'd done before. The art school applications looming over her junior year felt impossible. That night she set an alarm for 11:11 p.m, mostly as a joke. Noah had come over after school, sprawled on her floor editing his own work, charcoal sketches that he claimed were generative pessimism. "You're really doing this?" he asked when the alarm chirped. Grandpa was always weird about numbers. Might as well see if his magic camera does anything. She pointed it at her empty kitchen, visible through her bedroom doorway, and pressed the shutter at exactly 11:11. The camera whirred, louder than she expected, mechanical and purposeful. A Polaroid slid out, and they watched it develop in the dim light. The image that emerged made her stomach drop. Same kitchen, same angle, but different. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink, a shattered glass on the floor catching the overhead light. Her mum sat at the table with her head in her hands, shoulders curved inward. Noah's backpack, the one with the astronomy patches, slouched on a chair. "That's my bag," Noah said slowly. "Yeah, but you're not coming over tomorrow. You have that thing with your dad. Maybe I'll cancel." "Don't be weird about it. It's probably just a glitchy camera." But she kept the photo, slipping it into her desk drawer before Noah left. That night she lay awake, thinking about Grandpa in his darkroom, about the chemical smell and the red safe light and the way he'd always talk about photography like it was prophecy. A good photograph doesn't capture what is. It reveals what's trying to happen. The next day moved like a dream with the volume turned up. Noah texted her during lunch. His dad had called, another fight about college applications, and could he come over after school? She said yes, distracted, watching the hours tick toward evening. Her mum came home looking hollowed out, and Lena overheard a phone call about late mortgage payments and Grandpa's medical bills that were apparently still arriving. She tried to be helpful, started doing dishes, but her hands felt clumsy. When she reached for a glass, it slipped, exploding against the tile in a pattern that looked eerily familiar. By the time Noah arrived, his backpack landing on the kitchen chair with a thump, Lena's skin was crawling. Her mum sat at the table with her head in her hands, exactly that angle, exactly that posture. Lena checked her phone. 11:10 p.m. She sprinted to her room, yanked open the drawer, held the Polaroid up to the light. At 11:11, she walked back to the kitchen doorway and looked. Perfect. Not identical. Her mum's shirt was a different colour, the dishes weren't stacked quite the same, but the composition, the feeling, the essence of the scene, it was the photograph. "You okay?" Noah called from the kitchen. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Yeah," she said, but her voice came out strange. "Yeah, I'm fine." The next morning she was reorganising her wall of prints when she noticed it. A photograph from last spring, a candid she'd loved. The weekend street market, vendors and colour and motion. But something was wrong. The fruit vendor who usually occupied the left third of the frame, the man with the gap-toothed smile who always gave her an extra apple, he wasn't there, just empty space, a gap in the composition that made the whole image feel unbalanced. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to the digital backup. Same thing, empty space where she was certain someone had been. "Noah," she said when he answered her call. "That market photo on my wall, the one with all the colour, do you remember who's in it?" A pause. "Yeah, there's Wait, didn't there used to be a guy there, selling fruit?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. She told Noah everything over coffee at the diner, the Polaroid spread on the table between them. He listened with his sceptical face on, the one that made his eyebrows do that thing, but he didn't laugh. "Okay," he said finally. "So we test it. Scientific method. Tonight, 11:11, we shoot something specific and see what happens." They chose the main hallway at school. Lena had keys because of yearbook committee, and Noah was good at picking locks for the doors she didn't. At 11:11 p.m, the hallway was empty, fluorescent lights humming. She took the shot. The Polaroid showed the same hallway tomorrow, paint spilled across the floor in a bright yellow pool, Miss Chen standing over it with her hands on her hips, mouth open mid-yell. "Paint," Noah said. "Okay, let's watch for paint." The next day they lingered near that hallway, pretending to study. Third period, the art class started moving supplies and someone, Jessica Kim, perpetually clumsy, carried a bucket of yellow paint through the hall. She made it about 15 feet before someone bumped her. The bucket tipped, paint spreading across the floor. Miss Chen came around the corner at exactly the wrong moment. "How many times do I have to tell you people to be careful?" her voice echoed off the lockers. Lena and Noah looked at each other. At 11:11 that night, Lena pulled up the Polaroid on her phone where she'd photographed it. The scene matched. Not perfectly. Jessica stood in a slightly different spot. The paint pool was a different shape, but the core elements, the feeling, identical. "Holy shit," Noah breathed. "We need to test destroying one," Lena said. That night she took a photo of her bedroom. The Polaroid showed her room tomorrow with her phone screen visible on the desk, a text preview from a number she didn't recognise. "We need to talk about your grandfather's debts." Even in the Polaroid's small frame she could see enough to make her stomach twist. She held the photo over her sink and lit a match. The Polaroid curled and blackened, and she felt something in the air release, like a held breath finally exhaled. She flushed the ashes. The next day her phone stayed quiet. No unknown numbers. When she checked her bedroom at 11:11 p.m, her phone was elsewhere, screen dark. "So you can cancel futures," Noah said, "or lock them in." "Yeah," Lena said, "and every time I lock one in, something from my past disappears from my photos." They sat with that knowledge for a while. Then Lena started using the camera deliberately. She took a tomorrow shot of the living room, showing her and her mum actually sitting together on the couch, talking instead of orbiting each other in careful silence. She kept the photo, and the next day circumstances conspired. A pipe burst at work. Mum came home early. Lena's homework was due and she needed help. And somehow they ended up on that couch, actually talking about Grandpa, about missing him, about how hard everything had been. At 11:11, Lena glanced at the living room and saw it. The scene made real. The next morning she checked her photos. The old cafe that used to be in the background of her 12th birthday pictures was gone, replaced with a different storefront she didn't recognise. She took a tomorrow of the school parking lot, showing her with her camera, Noah beside her. Perfect lighting for the golden hour shot she'd been trying to nail for weeks. She kept it. The next day, everything aligned. The weather, the timing, Noah's schedule clearing, her finally feeling confident behind the lens. She got the shot. It was beautiful. A few days later, Noah was looking through her older prints and stopped. "Lena, wasn't there a cat in this one?" It was a family photo from years ago, Grandpa in his armchair. There was an empty cushion beside him, perfectly framed, but Lena could almost see it. Their old cat, the orange tabby that had died when she was 12. She checked other photos. Every image that had included the cat now showed empty spaces, vacant laps, furniture with no sleeping animal. "I'm erasing things," she whispered. "Maybe you should stop," Noah said, but his voice was uncertain. She took one more tomorrow shot. The school hallway. Noah walking away from his locker, shoulders tight with anger. She'd heard him and his guidance counsellor fighting about dropping out, about how art school was impractical and he needed to be realistic. In the Polaroid, she stood at the end of the hall, catching him before he left. She kept the photo. The next day she timed it perfectly, caught Noah just as he was storming out and said the right things, about talent and stubbornness, and not letting fear pretend to be practicality. He stopped. They talked. At 11:11 she realised the scene had played out almost exactly as photographed. But that night, looking through her earlier street photography, she noticed a figure missing from dozens of shots. An old man with a red scarf who used to occupy the same corner. She'd photographed him accidentally in backgrounds for months. Now he was gone from every frame, leaving awkward compositions and empty corners. Her wall of prints developed gaps. Places where she'd clustered photos now had visible walls showing through. Her photo history was being edited, reshuffled, rewritten. Then came the night she took a shot that made her blood go cold. The street outside at 11:11 p.m. was empty. The Polaroid showed tomorrow, an ambulance, red and blue lights washing across pavement, police tape stretched between parking meters, and there, just visible at the edge of the frame, Noah's jacket sleeve, the brown corduroy one he wore constantly. She stared at the photo for an hour. Noah sat beside her on her bedroom floor, very quiet. "Destroy it," he said finally. "What if destroying it makes it worse? What if this is the version where I can at least see it coming? Lena, I can outsmart it. I can keep you safe and satisfy the photograph. I just need to control the variables." She spent the next day in a state of heightened paranoia, keeping Noah close, changing routes, warning him away from the street. But reality kept bending back toward the frame. Traffic detours, sudden errands, his mum calling and needing something from that exact area. At 10:45 p.m, Noah was walking down that street despite everything. Lena was with him, physically pulling him toward the opposite sidewalk when they heard the screech of tyres. Another kid, Kyle from their English class, had swerved on his bike trying to avoid a car. The ambulance arrived at 11:07. By 11:11 the scene was close enough. Same lights, same tape, a jacket sleeve visible at the edge. Not Noah's jacket, Kyle's. But the composition was eerily similar, like reality had said close enough and called it even. Kyle would be okay. Broken collarbone, nothing. Permanent. But Lena couldn't stop shaking. The next day, whole sections of her photo archive were different. A stretch of downtown that she'd photographed for a yearbook spread now showed different storefronts, different street art, different faces in the backgrounds. She pulled out old yearbooks. Some were correct, some weren't. Her memories and the evidence kept diverging. "I think I had a mentor teacher," she told Noah, "Ms. Rodriguez. She taught the advanced photography elective freshman year." Noah shook his head slowly. "Lena, there's never been a Ms. Rodriguez at our school." "Yes, there was. I have photos." She pulled up her archive, searched frantically. Nothing. The teacher's face appeared nowhere. No yearbook entry, no photos. "This is getting bad," Noah said. His voice was gentle but firm. "Your grandfather's camera is eating your past." She found another envelope in the camera case that night, tucked in a pocket she'd missed before. More of Grandpa's Polaroids, but these had chunks physically scratched out. White voids where people or places had been. The note was in his handwriting. "You can only shoot tomorrow so many times before yesterday runs out of room. Choose your last frame carefully." "He knew," she said. "He used this camera and it did the same thing to him. What if there are people in his life who just disappeared? What if there are photos missing from our family albums because of this?" The tomorrow roll was almost empty, maybe 3 or 4 shots left. The camera felt heavier now, like it was full of futures and eating its own past to sustain them. Lena knew she should stop, but the photo competition deadline was approaching, and everything felt like it was sliding away from her. Her portfolio, her mum's financial stability, Noah's wavering commitment to staying in school, her own sense of direction. She wanted one perfect tomorrow to hold everything together. At 11:11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, she took what she promised herself would be the last shot. She aimed at her desk, imagining tomorrow. The acceptance letter from the competition, her mum smiling, Noah beside her, everything finally working out. The Polaroid developed slowly, grainier than the others, but it showed what she wanted. Her at her desk, holding a certificate, her mum's hand on her shoulder, Noah leaning in the doorway with a proud smile. Behind them, barely visible, her bedroom wall, but something was wrong with it. The print collages, her archive of work, looked sparse, almost bare, like her photographic journey had never existed, leaving only this polished finale. She understood then. If she let this tomorrow lock in, she'd lose everything that came before. The messy years of learning, the bad shots that taught her about light, the experimental phases, the photos of Grandpa in his darkroom showing her how to dodge and burn. All of it would be edited out, leaving only the success story. She sat with the Polaroid all day Wednesday, studying it. The competition was that evening. If she destroyed the photo, she'd have no control over what happened. Maybe she'd fail. Maybe her mum wouldn't show up. Maybe Noah would get cold feet about the whole art school thing. Or maybe it would just be real, imperfect and uncertain, and real. At 10:30 p.m, she found Noah sitting on her front steps. "So," he said. She held up the Polaroid. He looked at it for a long time, then looked at her wall through the window, the gaps, the missing pieces, the evidence of everything she'd traded away. "I liked you better when you shot terrible blurry pictures," he said, "when you were figuring it out." At 11 p.m, Lena placed the Polaroid in a metal bowl. At 11:07, she lit it with a match. The image curled and blackened, and she felt something massive unhook in her chest. The camera whirred once, a sad mechanical sound, and went silent. The last sheet of Tomorrow Roll was gone. Thursday arrived unframed. The competition didn't go perfectly. She got an honourable mention, not first place. The judge said her work showed promising technical skill, but lacked emotional authenticity. It stung, but not as much as she expected. Her mum showed up late, still in her work uniform, but she showed up. She hugged Lena tight in front of everyone and said, "Your grandfather would have loved these." Noah was there, wearing his ridiculous corduroy jacket, and afterward they got cheap tacos and he showed her his new charcoal series, Generative Pessimism, Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. That night, Lena checked her photo walls. The gaps had stopped growing. Some changes remained. The cat was still missing, the old street vendor was still gone, the cafe had been replaced with a different building in her memory. Her photo history was patchy, incomplete, edited by the choices she'd made, but nothing new disappeared. She took the empty camera and placed it in a box. With a marker, she wrote on the lid, "Yesterday only." Then she grabbed her digital camera and went outside. Rain had started, leaving the sidewalks glossy and reflecting streetlights. She took a shot of the puddles, then her mum visible through the kitchen window doing dishes, then Noah on her porch making faces at his phone. She printed one on her regular printer. Not a Polaroid, just a standard print, slightly grainy, the colours a bit off. It showed Noah mid-laugh, caught in that unflattering moment between expressions that somehow felt more true than any posed shot. She pinned it to her wall, right in the centre of one of the gaps. It wasn't perfect. The lighting was harsh, the composition slightly off-centre. But it was real, and when she looked at it, she knew it would stay. Over the next few weeks, Lena found herself drawn back to Grandpa's trunk in the attic. She'd avoided it after finding the camera, but now she needed to understand what he'd been through. The trunk contained more than just photographic equipment. There were journals, filled with his tight, precise handwriting, documenting experiments with the Tomorrow Roll that stretched back decades. The earliest entries were excited, almost manic. Grandpa had found the film at an estate sale in 1987, sold by a widow who claimed her husband had worked for Polaroid's research division in the 70s. The husband had been part of a secret project, something about manipulating silver halide crystals with temporal properties. The project was shut down. The researcher kept one experimental batch. Grandpa's entries detailed his first tests. Small things at first. Photographing his front porch, seeing tomorrow's newspaper lying there. He'd been fascinated, scientific. But then the tone shifted. Around 1992 he wrote, "Margaret's face is different in our wedding photo. Her sister isn't in it anymore. I remember a sister. Margaret doesn't. The photos don't lie. They've been rewritten." Lena's hands shook as she read. Margaret was her grandmother, who died before Lena was born. There were more entries, increasingly desperate. Grandpa had tried to reverse the effects, tried shooting yesterday, Tried leaving the camera unused for years. Nothing worked. The past, once edited, stayed edited. The final entries, dated just months before his death, were the most chilling. I barely remember the original timeline anymore. How many people have I erased? How many places? The darkroom is my anchor. I've kept it unchanged, filled it with prints I never let the camera touch. It's the only space I trust anymore. If you're reading this, you found the camera. You probably used it. I'm sorry, I should have destroyed it. But I couldn't. It was the last thing that made me feel like I had control. There was a loose photograph tucked in the back of the journal. It showed Grandpa in his darkroom, younger, standing beside another man, someone Lena didn't recognise. The other man's face was friendly, laughing at something. On the back, in faded pencil, Marcus and me, 1989. He understood. But there was no Marcus in any family stories Lena had ever heard. She brought the journal downstairs to show Noah. He read through it silently, his expression growing darker. He knew it was dangerous, Noah said finally. He knew it was eating his life, and he still couldn't stop using it. The last entry says he hid the camera. He must have stopped eventually. Or he ran out of film and couldn't find more. Noah looked at her. You realise what this means, right? Somewhere out there people remember a completely different version of your grandfather. Friends he erased. Places that existed. Your grandmother might have had a whole sister that nobody remembers now. Lena thought about the gaps in her own photo walls. How many versions of herself had she erased? Was there a timeline where she'd had a different pet, different friends in the background of her shots, different buildings in her neighbourhood? The thought made her nauseated. At school the next day, she found herself studying her classmates differently, wondering if any of them had been edited out of her history. During lunch, she approached Jessica Kim, the girl who'd spilled the paint. This is going to sound weird, Lena said, but do you remember if there used to be someone else who sat with our group? Someone who just isn't here anymore? Jessica's face went distant. That's funny you ask. I've had the weirdest feeling lately, like there's a chair that should be occupied, but I can't remember who sat there. A chill ran down Lena's spine. She wasn't the only one feeling the absences. The camera's effects rippled outward, creating uncomfortable blank spaces in collective memory. That evening she returned to the attic and searched more carefully through the trunk. She found a small envelope marked "Original Anchors" in Grandpa's handwriting. Inside were a dozen photographs that looked older, untouched by whatever degradation had affected her edited prints. These were crisp, clear, the colours still vibrant. They showed a version of family history that felt foreign. Grandma with a woman who must have been her sister, Grandpa with a man named Marcus, a house that Lena didn't recognise but that looked like it might have been theirs. She brought them down to her mum, who was paying bills at the kitchen table, stress lines deep around her eyes. "Mum, look at these." Her mum picked up the photo of Grandma and the other woman studied it. Something flickered across her face. Confusion. Then a strange, distant pain. I feel like I should know her," Mum said slowly. "This woman. She looks so familiar, but I can't place her. Grandpa's notes say she was Grandma's sister. That's impossible. Grandma was an only child," but her mum's voice wavered. "Wasn't she?" They sat together in the kitchen, looking through photographs of a past that had been partially erased. Mum cried, not understanding why these images of strangers made her chest ache with loss. Lena held her hand and felt the weight of what the camera had cost her family, not just in this generation, but in the one before. The next day, Lena made a decision. She gathered every photograph she had, digital files, prints, negatives from when she had experimented with film, and started organising them systematically. She created a physical archive, noting which images had changed, which gaps existed, which faces and places had disappeared. She wrote down everything she could remember about the edited elements, even though she knew her memory was unreliable. Noah helped her, and together they built a record of absences. It felt important to acknowledge what had been lost, even if they couldn't restore it. "Why are we doing this?" Noah asked during a late-night session, surrounded by prints and notes. "Because forgetting would be worse," Lena said. "The camera took things from my past, but I can at least remember that they existed. Even if the details are fuzzy, even if I can't prove it, I can acknowledge the gaps." She thought about Grandpa alone with his disappearing memories, trying to hold on to a history that kept shifting under his feet. He'd kept his darkroom as an anchor. but it hadn't been enough. He'd still lost people, still lost pieces of himself. But Lena had something he hadn't. She'd stopped before the tomorrow roll ran out completely. She'd chosen uncertainty over control. And now she had time to document what remained, to build something honest from the fragments. The archive grew over weeks. It became a testament not just to what she'd lost, but to what she'd learned. She printed new photos constantly, uncontrolled moments, imperfect captures, genuine confusion and joy and mess. She filled the gaps in her walls with these new images, letting them sit beside the edited ones, creating a visual history that acknowledged both the past she'd traded away and the present she was choosing to preserve. One night, almost a month after burning the last tomorrow shot, Lena stood in her room and looked at her walls. They were fuller now, chaotic, honest. The gaps were still visible, but they were surrounded by so much life that they felt less like losses and more like reminders. The empty spaces had become part of the composition, negative space that gave the rest meaning. Her mum appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of tea. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, handing one to Lena. "Not of the camera thing, but of this. You figured out how to stop." They stood together, sipping tea, looking at the archive of a life being lived forward instead of backward, captured in present tense rather than foreclosed future. Outside, rain started again, and Lena thought about going out to shoot it, but instead she stayed inside, standing with her mum in comfortable silence, letting the moment exist without trying to frame it, preserve it, or control what came next. "The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. You're a 16-year-old named Kai living in a mid-sized American city where the downtown mall is slowly dying, stores closing one by one, leaving behind flickering fluorescent lights and empty storefronts with soap-streaked windows. Your life right now is a collection of small regrets that pile up like unread notifications, text messages you typed out but never sent, still sitting in drafts with the cursor blinking, conversations with your best friend Rin where you said the wrong thing or nothing at all, and now there's this distance growing between you that neither of you knows how to close. A crush you've been nursing for months, but the invitation to hang out stays half written. Because what if they say no? What if it's weird? What if you ruin everything by trying? Your parents are fighting more lately, voices rising through thin walls about money and job opportunities in other cities, and you catch fragments of conversations about moving, about starting over somewhere cheaper, and the possibility hangs over your head like a sword you can't quite see but know is there. Rin has started making comments, little pointed things like, "You've been distant lately," and "I feel like you're not really here anymore," and you want to explain but you don't know how to say that you're scared of losing everything that's barely holding together as it is, so instead you just say, "I'm fine," and watch them not believe you. One particularly miserable evening after school, after another tense dinner where your parents ate in silence and you escaped to your room only to stare at your phone screen unable to decide whether to text Rin an apology, or your crush a casual, "Hey, what's up?" or just anyone anything to feel less alone, you give up and go to the mall even though there's almost nothing left there worth visiting. You walk past the shuttered clothing stores with their dusty mannequins frozen in last season's styles, past the food court where only 2 restaurants are still operating, and even those look like they're hanging on by a thread, past the arcade that closed years ago, or at least you thought it closed years ago because the gate was always down and the lights were always off. But tonight, something is different. As you wander aimlessly past the dark storefronts, cutting through the section of the mall where they haven't even bothered to replace the burned-out ceiling lights, you notice a faint glow coming from the old arcade entrance. The metal security gate is rolled halfway up, and inside you can see the distinctive blue-green glow of old CRT monitors, the kind that hum and crackle with static electricity if you get close enough. Synth music drifts out, barely audible, the kind of repetitive electronic melody that belongs to a different decade entirely. You duck under the security gate, not sure if you're allowed to be here or if the place is even officially open, but no one stops you. Inside, the arcade is exactly as you half remember it from childhood. Visits. Rows of battered cabinets with joysticks worn smooth by thousands of hands. Fighting games and racing games and light gun shooters, most of them dark and unplugged, but a few still running their attract modes in endless loops. Demo gameplay scrolling across screens that no one is watching. The carpet is the same ugly pattern of purple and teal geometric shapes that you remember thinking was cool when you were 8. The air smells like dust and old electronics and stale popcorn. At the very back of the arcade, past the rows of dead machines, you spot something you don't remember ever seeing before. A change machine, the kind that used to eat your dollar bills and spit out quarters, except this one is different. It's painted in faded pink and blue, colours that seem to shimmer slightly in the dim light, and across the front in peeling vinyl letters it says Neon Rewind. The coin slot has been covered over with duct tape, and the digital display is cracked and dark, but the coin return tray at the bottom holds something that catches your eye immediately. It's a single token, except it's not made of metal. It looks like glass or crystal or something else entirely, and it's glowing with a soft rainbow light that pulses gently like a heartbeat. You glance around the empty arcade, listen for any sound of an employee or manager, or anyone who might tell you to leave, but there's nothing except the quiet hum of machines and that faraway synth music still playing from some hidden speaker. You reach out and pick up the token. It's warm in your hand, warmer than it should be, and when you flip it experimentally between your fingers the way you might flip a coin, the sound it makes is completely wrong. Instead of the metallic clink-clink you expect, it makes a sound like tape rewinding in a VCR, that specific whirring mechanical noise that you've only heard in old videos online because who even uses VCRs anymore? You pocket the token, feeling strange about taking it but also unable to resist, and you leave the arcade and head home with the thing radiating gentle warmth through your jeans. Later that night you're in your room staring at your phone again, the same old paralysis. You've written and deleted a text to Rin about 5 times now, trying to find the right words to bridge the gap that's opened up between you, and you finally landed on something that feels honest but not too heavy, vulnerable but not pathetic, the kind of message that could either repair things or make them worse, and you won't know until you send it. Your thumb hovers over the send button, and your heart is pounding because this feels big. This feels like it matters, and you're suddenly aware of the token in your pocket, still warm, still pulsing with that faint light. Without really thinking about it, you pull it out and flip it in the air, watching it spin, and the instant it reaches the top of its arc, everything stops. Colours smear and streak across your vision like someone dragged a wet painting. Sound drops away into a vacuum of silence, and then everything snaps back into focus with a feeling like whiplash, and you're sitting on your bed staring at your phone, and the text message is unsent, still sitting in drafts exactly as it was 5 minutes ago. You can hear your parents' footsteps in the hallway approaching your door, the same footsteps you heard 5 minutes ago in the timeline that no longer exists. The token is still in your hand, warm and real and impossible. You sit there frozen, trying to process what just happened, running through possibilities in your head. Did you fall asleep? Are you having some kind of dissociative episode? But the memory of the last 5 minutes is perfectly clear. You were about to send the text, you flipped the token, time rewound. You test it again with something smaller, something lower stakes. Your mum knocks on your door and asks if you've finished your homework, and you respond with a snarky, "Yeah, mum, all done," that comes out harsher than you intended. And you see her face through the crack in the door, the little flicker of hurt before she says, "Okay then," and walks away. The guilt hits immediately, and before you can second-guess yourself, you flip the token again and the same thing happens. Colours smear, sound cuts out, reality snaps back, and you're sitting on your bed hearing the approach of footsteps that haven't happened yet. When your mum knocks this time, you say, "Almost done, I'll be down in a bit," in a gentler voice, and when she says, "Okay, honey," you can hear that she's not hurt, and you feel a weird rush of power and relief mixed together. You just changed the past. You just fixed a tiny mistake before it could settle into your permanent record of regrets. Over the next few days, you experiment with the token obsessively, learning its rules through trial and error. The main rule becomes clear quickly. Anytime you're about to make a choice, about to speak or send a message or walk away or do anything that constitutes a decision, if you flip the token first, then time rolls back exactly 5 minutes, back to the moment before you made that choice. Only your memory stays with you across the rewind. Everyone else forgets. Everything else resets. Spilled drinks unhappen. Words unspeak themselves. Clocks literally tick backward and then forward again from the new starting point. You can do this as many times as you want for any given choice, trying different versions, different approaches, different words, until you find the one that works best. It's like having infinite lives in a video game, except the game is your actual life, and the stakes are real. You use it for small things at first, building confidence. In math class, when Mr. Rodriguez calls on you and you freeze up, unable to remember the formula, you flip the token as soon as he moves to the next student, rewind 5 minutes, and use that time to quickly look up the formula on your phone under your desk so that when he calls on you again in the rewound timeline, you have the answer ready. And he nods approvingly, and you feel like you're finally getting the hang of this. When you're walking down the hallway, and you see your crush coming toward you, and you panic and say, "Hey, what's up?" in this weird strangled voice that makes them look at you oddly. You flip the token the moment they turn the corner, rewind, and this time you just nod casually as they pass, and that's so much better, so much less embarrassing. When Rin texts you asking if you want to hang out this weekend and your gut reaction is to make an excuse because things have been weird between you, you type out "sorry, I'm busy," but before you send it, you flip the token, and in the rewound version you force yourself to type "yeah, definitely, where do you want to meet?" instead, and when Rin responds immediately with enthusiasm, you feel the distance between you shrink just a little bit. The second part of the token's power reveals itself later, when you're drawn back to the arcade on another restless night. Most of the machines are still dark, but one in the very back corner is powered on now, a cabinet you don't remember seeing before with vector graphics glowing in simple white lines against a black screen. The game appears to be some kind of abstract timer or clock, showing the current date and a pixelated digital clock display counting the hours and minutes of the current day. When you approach it, the screen flickers and displays a simple prompt: "Insert token to lock day." You're not sure what that means, but you're curious enough to try it. You slide the rainbow token into the coin slot and it disappears into the machine in a cascade of neon light that swirls into the screen. The title screen flashes, "No more rewinds today. Score locked." And just like that, the token is gone from your hand, dissolved into digital light, and when you try to flip your empty palm, nothing happens. Time moves forward normally. The choices you've made today are permanent now, locked in, no more do-overs. You feel a strange mix of relief and anxiety at the finality of it. The next morning you wake up and find that the token is back in your pocket, solid and real and glowing softly. Apparently it resets each day, giving you a new chance to rewind and experiment and optimize before you have to lock things in by feeding it to the arcade cabinet. This becomes your routine. Use the token throughout the day to smooth over mistakes and awkward moments. Then at night, go back to the arcade and lock the day when you're satisfied with how it turned out. It's working. Your life is genuinely improving. You stop making stupid mistakes in class. You stop saying the wrong thing to people. Your conversations with Rin get easier, more natural, because you can test different responses until you find the one that doesn't create friction. Even your parents seem to respond better to you because you've learned through trial and error exactly what tone to use, what words to say, when to speak and when to stay silent. But then you start noticing things. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. After a night where you rewound the same choice 3 times, trying 3 different ways to respond to a late-night text from Rin about whether you remember this thing that happened in middle school, you wake up the next day and decide to go to the mall. You want to stop by that tiny candy shop on the 2nd floor, the one that's been there forever, the one where the old lady working the counter always gives you an extra gummy bear if you're nice to her. Except when you get there, the shop is gone. In its place is a generic kiosk selling phone cases and cheap electronics. You ask one of the remaining mall employees about the candy shop and they look at you like you're confused. "There's never been a candy shop there," they say. "That kiosk's been there for years." You pull out your phone to check old photos you know you took of the candy shop's ridiculous cartoon mascot painted on the wall, but when you scroll through your camera roll, the photos aren't there. Instead, there are photos of the phone case kiosk from various angles. Photos you have no memory of taking, dated from months ago. Another time you rewind whether or not to grab an umbrella before leaving the house, trying both versions to see which one results in less hassle, and the next day you're looking through family photo albums with your mum when you notice that a picture you remember from childhood is gone. It was the one from your 8th birthday, the one where you're wearing that ridiculous party hat and your dad is making a goofy face in the background. Now there's a different picture in that spot from what appears to be the same birthday party, but on a different day, or maybe at a different location entirely, and when you ask your mum about the other photo, she has no idea what you're talking about. "This is the only picture we have from that party, honey," she says, and you can see in her eyes that she genuinely believes this, that her memory has been rewritten along with the photograph. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every time you rewind the same choice more than once, something in the past changes. Small things, usually. Random things. A casual acquaintance at school who used to wave to you in the hallway now walks past like you're strangers, and when you bring up the time you worked together on a group project sophomore year, they look confused and say, "I think you're mixing me up with someone else, we've never done a project together." Your favourite teacher's catchphrase changes from "let's get after it" to "let's make it happen." And when you mention the old phrase, they laugh and say, "I've never said that in my life, where did you get that idea?" The alley where you learned to skateboard when you were 12 has different graffiti now, a completely different mural, and when you ask Rin if they remember the old design, they tilt their head and say, "It's always looked like this, hasn't it?" And you realise with creeping horror that you're the only one who remembers the original version. You become more careful about using the token after that, trying to limit yourself to 1 or at most 2 rewinds per choice. But you've already opened Pandora's box and the temptation is too strong. Your parents are fighting more seriously now about the move, actual yelling matches behind closed doors, and you discover that you can use the token to manage these situations. You rewind your entry into the kitchen during an argument, trying different approaches. One version where you ask them calmly to stop fighting, another where you make a joke to cut the tension, another where you just grab what you need from the fridge and leave silently. You cycle through possibilities until you find the combination that de-escalates things, the exact right word said at the exact right moment that makes your dad take a breath and your mum's shoulders relax and suddenly they're not quite so angry anymore. It feels like a victory, except you have to do this multiple times a week now, and you're starting to lose track of which version of these conversations actually happened. Which timeline is the real one? At school you use the token to nail a big group presentation, rewinding your opening jokes and timing until the whole class laughs in the right places, and your teacher gives you an approving nod, and your group members actually seem impressed with your contribution. You use it to carefully navigate a conversation with Rin, where you confess to lying about something weeks ago, something small, but the guilt has been eating at you, and you try different tones, different phrasings, different levels of apologetic versus matter-of-fact until you find the version where Rin sighs but ultimately forgives you, and things feel okay between you again. You use it to manage a scholarship interview that could determine whether you can afford college without your parents having to move somewhere cheaper, rewinding and rewinding until you've memorised the perfect answer to every question, and the interviewer is nodding enthusiastically and shaking your hand firmly at the end. From the outside, looking in, your life is genuinely improving in measurable ways. Your grades are better, your social interactions are smoother. People seem to like you more. Rin stops making comments about you being distant. Your parents still fight but less explosively, but the discontinuities keep piling up in ways you can't ignore anymore. Rin references a memory of the two of you skipping class together to go to this diner across town, talks about it like it's this foundational bonding experience, and you have absolutely no memory of this ever happening. But you nod along, because what else can you do? You discover you're suddenly decent at one of the rhythm games in the arcade, the DDR-style one where you stomp on arrows, and people compliment your footwork, but you're certain you've never practiced this game. You've never been good at it, yet your body seems to know the patterns. You notice a scar on your knee one day in the shower, a small white line that definitely wasn't there before, and when you ask your mum about it, she says, "Oh, that's from when you fell off your bike in 8th grade, remember?" But you don't remember. You don't remember falling off your bike that year at all. The world around you is still fundamentally the same city, same school, same people, but the details are being swapped out and rearranged like someone is constantly redecorating a room while you sleep. Reality is reconciling your do-overs by editing the past to accommodate the new present you keep creating. Every time you rewind a choice and pick differently, the timeline has to adjust itself backward to make that new choice make sense, and those adjustments ripple outward in unpredictable ways, changing small things, rewriting minor memories, shuffling the deck of your personal history. You go back to the neon rewind machine looking for answers, hoping the arcade or the machine itself will explain what's happening. This time, when you approach the change machine, its dead display flickers to life briefly and scrolls a message in pixelated text. Tokens issue 1 per player. 1 token per lifetime. Non-transferable. Then the display dies again. You turn to the vector graphics cabinet in the back and notice something you missed before. It has a high score screen, and the names listed there aren't yours. Different names, different dates, going back years. Other people who apparently found the token and used it and locked their days. You wonder what happened to them, whether they're still around, whether they kept their memories when reality rewrote itself around them. One night you encounter the arcade tech, an older guy with grey in his beard and tired eyes who's doing maintenance on one of the machines. You've never seen an actual employee here before, never seen anyone here at all actually, and you're not sure if he's real or part of the arcade's weird magic. You ask him about the token, about what it does, about why reality keeps shifting. He doesn't look up from the machine he's working on when he answers. Kids come in here thinking they're playing the game, he says, thinking they're in control. Truth is, the game plays you, always has. You get to rewind 5 minutes, but you can't rewind the consequences. Those spread backward like cracks in ice. You want to ask more, but when you turn around again, he's gone, just vanished, and you're alone in the arcade with the humming machines. Things come to a head when the big choice arrives, the one you've been dreading. Your parents sit you down and tell you they've made a decision. They're taking a job offer 3 states away, and you'll be moving at the end of the semester. You have maybe 8 weeks left in this city, in this school, with Rin and your crush, and the dying mall and everything that's familiar. Your first instinct is to use the token, to rewind this conversation, and try different arguments, different pleas, different perfectly calibrated emotional appeals that might convince them to stay. You've gotten so good at finding the right words, the right tone, the right moment to speak. You could workshop this conversation a dozen times until you find the version that changes their minds. But Rin has been noticing things. The way you always seem to say exactly the right thing now. The way you never stumble over your words anymore. The way conversations with you feel weirdly rehearsed, even though they're supposedly spontaneous. Rin confronts you one afternoon, sitting on the hood of their car in the mall parking lot where you used to hang out before half the stores died. "Something's wrong with you," Rin says. Not meanly, but with genuine concern. "You're like a person-shaped algorithm now. You always optimize for the best response. You never just react anymore. It feels like you're workshopping your personality on other versions of me that I can't remember. And you want to deny it, but you can't, because Rin is absolutely right. You have been practicing on them, testing responses, finding the perfect versions of conversations, and in doing so you've created this weird artificial smoothness that isn't really you anymore. You decide to use the token anyway because you can't help yourself. The conversation with your parents about moving is too important, too life-altering. You rewind it 6 times, trying 6 different approaches. The angry version where you yell and cry and tell them they're ruining your life. The calm rational version where you present counter-arguments about job markets and cost of living. The emotional manipulation version where you play on their guilt about disrupting your senior year. The supportive version where you pretend to be okay with it, while subtly undermining their confidence in the decision. The compromise version, where you propose alternative solutions. The silent version where you just walk away and let them feel terrible about unilaterally deciding your future. None of them work. No matter which version you choose, no matter how perfectly you calibrate your words, your parents have already made up their minds and the financial reality is what it is, and you're moving at the end of the semester. That night you burn through more rewinds than you've ever used in a single day. You keep trying to perfect everything, to control every variable. You rewind a conversation with Rin where you try to explain about the token, but it sounds insane, so you rewind and try again with different phrasing, but it still sounds insane. You rewind a text exchange with your crush, trying to finally send that invitation, workshopping it a dozen times until the words feel right, but by the time you actually send it, you've rewritten the message so many times that it doesn't even sound like you anymore. You rewind an argument with your parents, trying to find any angle that might change things. You rewind ordering food at the last open restaurant in the food court, because the bored teenager behind the counter gave you a weird look, and even that tiny social friction feels intolerable now. You need it to be perfect. You need every interaction to be optimized. When you finally stagger back to the arcade late that night to lock the day, to feed the token to the vector cabinet and make all these choices permanent, you feel hollowed out and exhausted. The token dissolves into light, the screen flashes no more rewinds, and you stumble out of the arcade into the mall, and something feels deeply wrong. The city looks the same, but it feels different in a way you can't articulate. The next morning you wake up and the wrongness persists. Your social circle at school is bizarrely different. Some people you were casual friends with now treat you like you're close, inside jokes you don't remember, while others you thought you were tight with act like distant acquaintances. You have skills that feel second-hand, muscle memories that don't match your actual memories. You're apparently good at playing bass guitar now, even though you've never owned a bass, and when your mum mentions your lessons, you just nod along because what else can you do? Most painfully, you realise you can't clearly remember certain foundational moments anymore. The first time you and Rin officially became friends, that crucial day in middle school where something clicked between you, the memory is fuzzy now, multiple overlapping versions that don't quite cohere. The day your parents bought the couch that's been in your living room for years, you could swear it was a Saturday morning, but also, maybe it was a Tuesday afternoon, and maybe you were there or maybe you weren't. The exact layout of the mall before half the stores closed, which shops were where, the route you used to take through the building, it's all blurred and uncertain like a photograph left out in the sun too long. You meet Rin at your usual spot and you both sit in silence for a while, before they finally say, "I've been keeping a journal, just random stuff, daily observations." I went back and read the entries from last year, and some of them describe things I don't remember happening, events I have no memory of, and there are gaps where I know something happened but I didn't write about it, and I can't remember what it was. They look at you directly. This is you, isn't it? This is whatever you've been doing. You can't lie to them anymore, so you tell them everything, about the token and the rewinds and the way reality keeps shifting to accommodate your optimised choices. Rin listens without interrupting, and when you're done they say, "You've been rewriting both of us, and we can't even tell what the original version looked like anymore." Together you make a project of trying to reconstruct what before looked like. Rin brings their journal, their zine notebooks full of sketches and observations and unfiltered thoughts from before you started rewriting everything. You dig up old photos and save text messages and compare your conflicting memories, trying to piece together which version of events actually happened first, before the edits. Some things you can pin down with confidence, other things are gone, overwritten too many times, lost in the recursive loops of your do-overs. You have to accept that you can't restore everything. The original timeline is gone, replaced by this mosaic of optimised moments that create a life that feels oddly performative and hollow, despite technically being better in measurable ways. The arcade tech appears again one night, or maybe you seek him out, you're not sure anymore. He tells you that locking your day with the token is optional. You can also just not use it. You can let the token sit inert in your pocket. Accept whatever choices you made naturally without rewinds. Let the day be messy and imperfect and fixed without the arcade's intervention. The machine wants you to keep playing, he says, wants you to keep optimising, but you can walk away any time. Of course, walking away means living with regret. Most people can't do that. He disappears into the rows of dead machines before you can ask anything else. You're faced with a decision. You have the token. You could keep using it, keep smoothing over every rough edge of your life, keep searching for the perfect version of every choice. Or you could stop. You could accept imperfection and regret and the natural consequences of decisions made in the moment without the benefit of hindsight and rehearsal. Your parents are still moving. That's not changing regardless of how many times you rewind conversations about it. Rin knows what you've been doing now, and the trust between you is damaged, and no amount of perfectly calibrated apologies will fix that, because the problem isn't what you're saying, it's what you've been doing to the foundation of your relationship. Your life is a patchwork of original and altered moments, and you can't separate them anymore, and maybe that's just how it has to be now. You make a choice. On a quiet evening near closing time, you go back to the Neon Rewind arcade one last time. The Vector cabinet in the back is powered on, waiting. But instead of using the token to lock another heavily edited day, instead of continuing the cycle, you walk over to a different cabinet, one you've never played before. It's an old rail shooter, the kind where you hold a plastic gun and shoot at pixelated enemies on the screen. Simple, unforgiving. No continues, or at least the continue feature is broken, the coin slot taped over. You feed the rainbow token into this machine instead. The token dissolves into neon light that swirls into the screen and the game starts immediately. Play once. No rewinds, no continues. You play the game with Rin standing next to you watching. You're terrible at it. Your timing is off. You miss easy shots. Enemies swarm you. The score counter barely budges. You die within the first 2 minutes and game over flashes on the screen in blocky red letters. You and Rin burst out laughing at how comically bad you were. Genuine laughter that feels different from the calibrated humour you've been performing lately. Nothing rewinds. Time doesn't snap backward. The choices you made in the game are permanent and you lost, and that's okay. The day remains flawed and fixed. and it feels more real than anything has felt in weeks. When you leave the arcade that night, the token doesn't return to your pocket the next morning. It's gone for good, spent on a throwaway game that meant nothing except as a gesture, a way of saying you're done optimizing, done searching for perfect versions. The subtle glitches in the city begin to stabilize. Time doesn't fully reset to an original state because there is no original state anymore. Some of the edited details are permanent now, but at least things stop drifting further. The couch in your living room is whatever couch it is. The scar on your knee came from whatever accident left it there. Rin's memory of skipping class with you either happened or it didn't, and maybe you'll never know for sure, but you can build forward from here regardless. You're still moving at the end of the semester. Your parents already signed the paperwork. That regret, that loss, you have to carry it without the option of rewinding and trying different arguments. Rin is still hurt by what you did even though they're trying to forgive you, and that's a consequence you have to sit with. Let heal naturally without forcing it through optimized conversations. Your crush never responded to your message, or maybe they did and it fizzled out. Either way, that chance is gone and you don't get to workshop a better approach. These are the terms now. Every choice is single play, no rewinds, permanent the moment you make it, and that's terrifying, but also liberating because it means your life is actually yours, not an algorithmic optimization of someone else's design. The mall lights dim as closing time approaches. The arcade's metal security gate rolls down slowly, the motor grinding and squeaking. In the darkness behind the gate, you can barely make out the neon rewind change machine, its pink and blue paint faded and peeling. The display flickers once, a last pulse of rainbow light, and then goes dark permanently. In your pocket, there's no token anymore, just a cheap metal arcade prize Rin won honestly that night playing a claw machine that's probably rigged, but they got lucky anyway. It's a little enamel pin shaped like a joystick, worthless for time travel, worthless for undoing mistakes, but you keep it anyway as a reminder. From now on, every choice you make is unrehearsed and permanent, and you have to live with whatever comes from that, and somehow that makes the choices feel like they actually matter, like they're actually yours. You walk out of the mall with Rin and the automatic doors close behind you, and you don't look back at the arcade because looking back won't change anything, and maybe that's the point. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. Leo pressed his face against the chain-link fence, fingers hooked through the diamonds of rusted wire. Beyond the barrier, the old rail yard stretched out in moonlight, a graveyard of gravel and concrete pylons that once held up the city's elevated trains. His breath fogged in the November air. 16 years old, and he'd never seen a train run overhead, not in real life. The city had torn down the tracks when he was 3, sold the steel for scrap, paved over the dreams of an earlier century. But Leo collected what remained. Dog-eared transit maps from estate sales, black and white photographs of commuters in fedoras stepping off carriages, even a chunk of wooden railroad tie he'd found in a dumpster behind the Historical Society. His room smelled like creosote and old paper. He'd been planning this for weeks. The fence had a gap near the southwest corner where the posts had rotted, and someone, probably taggers or copper thieves, had peeled back the wire. Leo squeezed through, felt the metal scrape his jacket and dropped into the yard. Gravel crunched under his sneakers. Above him the pylons rose like enormous concrete ribs, supporting nothing but air and the weight of what used to be. He clicked on his phone's flashlight and picked his way between the rows, scanning the ballast for anything worth saving. A spike, maybe. A fragment of a tie plate. Anything that had touched the trains. 20 minutes of searching turned up bottle caps, a soggy work glove, part of a newspaper from 2009. Then his light caught something that didn't belong. A dull metallic glint half buried where 2 pylons met. He crouched and dug with his fingers. The object was heavy, cold, egg-shaped. He brushed away the grit and his heart kicked. A pocket watch. Tarnished brass case, cracked crystal face, and on the lid a tiny engraved locomotive with smoke curling from its stack. The hands were frozen at 12:17. Leo turned it over and found an inscription so worn he could barely make it out. Time spent is time lost. He sat back on his heels, cradling the watch. It felt older than the trains, older than the city maybe. The crown was stiff, but after some coaxing it turned. The watch began to tick, a sound like fingernails on glass, and the hands shuddered into motion. Leo checked his phone, 11:54 p.m. He wound the crown all the way and stood, holding the watch up to the light. The crystal was so cracked it looked like a spider web, but through it he could see the delicate mechanism turning. Beautiful. Then the air changed. A low thrumming, like a bass note, played through the ground itself. Leo froze. The gravel vibrated under his feet. Above him, between the empty pylons, something was forming. Lines of pale light sketching themselves across the darkness, rail by rail, tie by tie. Within seconds, a full elevated track hovered 20 feet up, glowing faintly blue-white, translucent as fog. Leo's mouth fell open. He heard no engine, no warning bell, but a train was coming. Silent and spectral, it glided into view from the east. 3 carriages of antique design, windows glowing, the whole thing made of the same ghostly luminescence as the tracks. It slowed as it passed over him and stopped, hovering directly above where he stood. He should have run. Instead, he stared at the watch in his hand. The minute hand was sweeping toward the 12, and as it touched that mark, 12:17 exactly, the train's doors hissed open. Cold air rushed down, smelling of metal and old upholstery and something else. Something like the air before a thunderstorm. A set of stairs unfolded from the nearest carriage, reaching down almost to the gravel. Leo looked around the empty rail yard, looked back at the stairs, and made a decision that felt both insane and inevitable. He climbed. The interior of the carriage was empty. Rows of wooden bench seats, brass handrails polished to a dull shine, overhead lights flickering like candle flames. No conductor, no passengers, just him and the ticking of the watch in his pocket. He walked forward slowly. At the front of the carriage, where a route map should have been, there was instead a station board made of old flipping tiles, the kind that used to clatter in airports. But the destinations were wrong. They read, bus stop 7:42 a.m, line at the registrar 3:05 p.m, waiting room 9:11 a.m, bedroom staring at ceiling 11:34 p.m. Leo's skin prickled. He knew these. The bus stop on Harmon Street where he zoned out every morning. The registrar's office where he'd stood in line on his phone, barely noticing the 40 minutes pass. The hospital waiting room last spring when his mum had been called in for her shift and he'd sat there playing a game, bored and resentful. These were his minutes, the ones he'd thrown away without thinking, lost time. The board clattered and a new entry appeared. Math class 1:23 p.m. He remembered. Last Thursday, Mr. Ventura droning about quadratic equations, and Leo staring at a water stain on the ceiling for a full minute, his mind somewhere else entirely. The board highlighted the entry, pulsing gently. Leo reached out and touched it. The tile spun and locked. Destination selected. The doors hissed shut. The train lurched, and through the windows the rail yard blurred into streams of light. Leo grabbed a handrail, his stomach dropping as if he were in an elevator going sideways through time itself. Then everything stopped. The doors opened onto a familiar hallway. 3rd floor of the school, the math wing, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He could hear Mr. Ventura's voice through the open classroom door. Leo checked the watch. The minute hand was crawling forward from the 12. He had time. He stepped off the train into the hallway. The train vanished the moment his foot hit the linoleum. He was standing in the school at 1:23 p.m. on a Thursday. That had already happened, but he was fully aware, fully present. Inside the classroom, he could see his own back, his other self, the version who had lived this minute the first time, staring vacantly at the ceiling. Leo felt a vertiginous doubling, like standing between 2 mirrors. He pushed open the door and walked to his desk. The other Leo flickered like a bad projection and dissolved. He was singular again, sitting in his seat, but this time he was paying attention. Mr. Ventura was mid-sentence. So when you're factoring, always look for common terms before you start applying the quadratic formula. Leo pulled out his notebook and actually wrote it down. He copied the example from the board. He asked a clarifying question. Mr. Ventura blinked, surprised, and answered. Leo felt the minute ticking past, felt himself living inside it instead of sleepwalking through. Then his pocket grew warm. The watch. He pulled it out. The minute hand was almost back to 12, completing its rotation. 60 minutes since he'd boarded. The classroom began to shimmer at the edges. He stood and walked to the door. No one noticed. They never did in these stolen moments. The hallway rippled, and suddenly the ghost train was there again, Doors open, waiting. He stepped aboard and the doors sealed behind him. Another lurch, another blur, and he was back in the rail yard under the stars, the spectral tracks fading above him. He checked his phone. 12:15 a.m. 1 minute had passed. But when he thought back to math class, he remembered it both ways now. The original bored minute and the new attentive one, layered over each other like a double exposure. And when he went to school on Monday and took the quiz, the formula was there in his head, solid and usable. He got a 91 instead of an 84. Over the next 2 weeks, Leo rode the hour hand railroad 6 more times. He went back to the bus stop and texted Mia instead of scrolling through nothing. They'd stopped talking after a stupid fight last summer, and in the original timeline that bus stop minute had been empty static. Now he wrote, "Hey, sorry I was a jerk about the whole talent show thing. Miss you." She wrote back 3 hours later, "Miss you too, weirdo." 1 minute rewritten, a friendship reopened. He went back to the hospital waiting room and instead of staring at his phone, he told his mum she was doing a good job, that he knew the double shifts were hard. She'd teared up a little and hugged him. That moment had been erased. Now it was full. But he started noticing things. After the third trip, the city bus that was always on time pulled up 4 minutes late. The driver looked confused, said his watch, and the bus clock didn't match. After the 5th trip, the school bell rang at 8:03 instead of 8, and the principal made an announcement about technical difficulties. Leo's mum came home from her nursing shift flustered because the hospital's scheduling system had put her in the wrong wing, and she'd missed the first 10 minutes of her rounds. On the local news, a segment about timing glitches, traffic lights desyncing, trains skipping stations, residents complaining their phone clocks and microwave clocks disagreed. The anchors laughed it off as Y2K-style paranoia. Leo sat on his bed, the pocket watch in his hands, and felt the weight of coincidence pressing on him. Every time he'd taken a minute back, the city had lost a little punctuality. It was as if there was only so much working time to go around, and by reclaiming his wasted minutes he was borrowing from the pool everyone else depended on. But he kept going. The temptation was too strong. He went back to a forgotten minute before a history test, skimmed one more page and aced the short answer section. He went back to a dull minute at the DMV and noticed his little brother Marcus in the parking lot looking lost. In the original timeline, Leo had been staring at a pamphlet about organ donation. Now he jogged outside, found Marcus and walked him home. Marcus had been planning to cut through an alley that night and got mugged in the first version. This time, it never happened. Mia noticed Leo's sudden luck. They were back to hanging out after school, spending afternoons at the diner on 4th Street, and she kept giving him these sideways looks. "You're different," she said one day, poking at her fries. "Like you're always one step ahead. It's weird." "Good weird or bad weird?" Leo asked. He was trying to sound casual, but the watch was heavy in his jacket pocket, ticking quietly. "I don't know yet," she said. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Have you noticed anything strange about the city lately? I've been working on this piece for the paper about timing problems. Buses bunching up, emergency services complaining about dispatch errors, people missing appointments because their clocks are all wrong. I'm calling it the timing plague." She laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "It's like the whole city is slipping sideways." Leo's mouth went dry. "That's a little dramatic, don't you think?" "Maybe." She stirred her soda with her straw. "But my mum's a dispatcher for the ambulances, and she says they've had 3 incidents this month where crews arrived late because the call timestamps didn't match the GPS logs. 3 incidents, Leo. People could die from that." He looked down at his plate. He wanted to tell her, wanted to show her the watch and explain everything, but the words stuck in his throat. If he told her, she'd tell him to stop. And he wasn't ready to stop. Marcus was safe now. His grades were climbing. His mum smiled more. These were good things. Surely they were worth a few late buses. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the watch on his nightstand ticking like a second heartbeat. He thought about the ghost train station board and all the minutes listed there. Hundreds, maybe thousands of lost moments from his own life. How many had he wasted? How many could he reclaim? The idea intoxicated him. He could optimize everything, fix every mistake, become the best version of himself by going back and back until there were no wasted minutes left. He could be perfect. He got out of bed, grabbed the watch and headed for the rail yard. It was 11:47 p.m. He squeezed through the fence, stood under the pylons and wound the watch. The thrumming began, the ghost tracks materialised, and the train arrived exactly at 12:17. He boarded and scanned the station board. There it was, the minute he needed, kitchen 6:42 p.m. last Tuesday. He'd been making a sandwich, vaguely aware that his phone was buzzing in the other room. Marcus calling. Leo had ignored it, too focused on mustard and turkey, and later he found out Marcus had been trying to reach him because some kids were hassling him on the walk home. In the original timeline, Marcus had tried to take a shortcut through a construction site to avoid them and tripped, breaking his wrist on a pile of rebar. 3 hours in the ER, a cast for 6 weeks, and a look on Marcus's face like maybe his older brother didn't care. Leo touched the board. Destination selected. The train moved. He stepped into the kitchen at 6:42 p.m. on a Tuesday evening that had already passed. His other self was at the counter, assembling the sandwich in slow motion. Leo walked past him, through him, and felt the weird dissolving sensation as his past self evaporated. He grabbed his phone from the living room, saw Marcus's name on the screen and answered. "Hey, what's up?" Marcus's voice was small and scared. "There's these kids following me. I'm on Oakmont by the construction site." "Stay on the line," Leo said. "I'm coming to get you." He ran. He had the minute and he used every second of it, sprinting out the door, down the street, cutting through the alley. He reached Oakmont just as Marcus was veering toward the construction site fence. "Marcus!" The kids behind his brother, 3 of them, older, bored and mean, saw Leo and hesitated. Leo jogged up, put a hand on Marcus's shoulder and stared the kids down until they shrugged and walked off. Marcus's face flooded with relief. The watch grew warm. Leo checked it, the minute hand completing its circle. The world shimmered. He ran back the way he'd come, and the ghost train was waiting at the end of the alley, impossible and real. He jumped aboard, the doors closed, and he was back in the rail yard, gasping, exhilarated. Marcus was safe. The wrist had never broken. Leo had saved him. But when he got home, his phone was buzzing with notifications, group texts from school, a news alert, a house fire on the east side. An ambulance had been delayed, dispatch timestamp errors again, and a woman had died of smoke inhalation before the paramedics arrived. Leo sat on his bed, staring at the screen. The fire had happened at 6:51 p.m, 9 minutes after he'd rewritten Marcus's minute. 9 minutes when the city's clocks were just a little more out of sync. He told himself it wasn't connected. Couldn't be. But the doubt gnawed at him. Over the next week, the timing plague got worse. Buses arrived in chaotic clumps or not at all. A train overshot the station and had to reverse, delaying thousands of commuters. Traffic lights cycled out of order, causing a 6-car pile-up on the interstate. Leo watched the news and felt sick. The watch sat in his drawer now, wrapped in a sock, but he could still hear it ticking through the wood. Mia called him, frantic. "My mum got suspended. There was another ambulance delay and they're blaming the dispatchers, saying they're entering the times wrong, but Leo, she swears she's not. She says the computer clocks are changing on their own." "That's awful," Leo said, and meant it. "I'm going to figure this out," Mia said. "There's a pattern here. I can feel it." He almost told her then. Almost. But fear choked the words. If he told her and she made him stop, what would happen to Marcus? The break would come back, along with the mugging, the fear. Leo couldn't undo that. So he said nothing. The ghost train was changing too. When he boarded it the next time, a late-night ride to fix a stupid comment he'd made to his mum last month, he found he wasn't alone. There were other passengers now, blurred and translucent, sitting in the seats or standing by the doors. They looked exhausted, hollowed out, and they muttered to themselves in voices like wind through broken windows. Missed the meeting. Late for the wedding. Never said goodbye. Leo tried to speak to one, a middle-aged man in a suit that looked decades out of style, but the man just stared through him and whispered, "I was only going to be a minute." An older figure appeared at the front of the carriage near the station board. Tall and gaunt, wearing a conductor's uniform that might have been black or dark blue, or simply the colour of absence. The conductor carried a ledger, old leather-bound, and was making notations with a pencil that had no eraser. He glanced at Leo, and his eyes were kind, but infinitely tired. "You're overdrawing," the conductor said. Leo's voice cracked. "What?" "The pool of forgotten time. It's finite. Every minute you reclaim is a minute taken from the collective." The conductor tapped the ledger. "The city runs on schedules, boy. Take too many minutes and the whole system unravels." I'm just fixing my mistakes, Leo said. I'm making things better. For you, the conductor said. But a city isn't one person. It's a million people all agreeing roughly on when things happen. You've been erasing that agreement minute by minute. He gestured at the other passengers. These are the ones who tried to take too much, missed their return window. Now they're part of the in-between, riding forever, trying to get back to moments that don't exist anymore. Leo looked at the blurred figures and felt ice in his chest. How do I stop? You give it back, the conductor said simply. Restore the minutes you took. But that means living them the way they were, the wasted ones, the painful ones. You can't be in two places at once. Giving time back means surrendering control. He closed the ledger. Choose carefully, the clock is still running. The train lurched and Leo stumbled back to the present rail yard, the conductor's words echoing in his head. He sat on the gravel for a long time, the watch heavy in his hand, trying to understand the shape of the trap he'd built for himself. The next day, he told Mia everything. They sat in her car in the high school parking lot after the final bell, and he showed her the watch, explained the ghost train, described every trip he'd taken. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he finished, there was a long silence. So you've been rewriting conversations we had, she said finally. The text on the bus, that was manufactured. No, Leo said quickly. I mean, I chose to send it, but I meant it. I really did miss you. But you engineered the moment. Her voice was flat. You optimized our friendship. I was trying to fix things. You were trying to control things. She looked at him, and he saw anger and hurt and something that might have been pity. Do you even know what's real anymore, Leo? How many of your good grades were actually earned? How many moments with your family were genuine? Marcus is safe, Leo said, and his voice broke. I saved him. Her expression softened slightly. I know, and that's good. But you heard what the conductor said. You're breaking the city. My mum is suspended. People are dying because ambulances are late. You're playing God with time and the bill is coming due. He put his head in his hands. What do I do? Mia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You give it back. They planned it together over the next 2 days. Leo would take one final trip on the Hourhan Railroad, but instead of reclaiming minutes, he would use it to undo his interventions. The watch had a mechanism they'd discovered. If he boarded the train and selected a minute he'd already rewritten, he could choose to restore it to its original form. It would mean reliving the wasted time, the boredom, the mistakes, the pain. But it would also return those minutes to the city's pool, resyncing the clocks, giving back the punctuality he'd stolen. The hard part was deciding which minutes to surrender. Leo made a list. The math class where he'd learned the formula, he could give that back. His grade would drop, but he'd survive. The DMV minute where he'd noticed Marcus in the parking lot. That one was harder, but Marcus hadn't been in real danger there, just inconvenienced. He could give it back. The hospital waiting room with his mum, he hated the idea of erasing that moment of connection, but he wrote it on the list anyway. But the kitchen minute, the one where he'd saved Marcus from the broken wrist and the mugging, that was where he stopped. He couldn't. He wouldn't. You might have to, Mia said gently. They were in the rail yard, standing under the pylons as midnight approached. If you want to give back enough minutes to fix the city, that's one of the big ones. There has to be another way, Leo said. Maybe, Mia said. But maybe there isn't. Maybe the city's punctuality is worth more than one kid's broken wrist. I don't know, Leo. I can't make that choice for you. He looked at her, at the watch in his hand, at the empty rail yard that would soon fill with ghostlight and impossible trains. He thought about his brother, about ambulances arriving late, about the woman who died in the house fire while dispatch clocks disagreed. He thought about 1 million people trying to coordinate their lives and what it meant when the shared clock broke down. At 12:70 he wound the watch. The thrumming began. The tracks appeared, glowing and spectral, and the train arrived like a memory made solid. Leo climbed aboard. Mia stayed on the ground, watching. The station board was different now. Instead of just listing his wasted minutes, it showed 2 columns, borrowed and restored. The borrowed column had all the minutes he'd rewritten. The restored column was empty. Leo scrolled through the list, touching each entry carefully. Math class 1:23 p.m. Restore. The board clicked and whirred. Bus stop 7:42 a.m. Restore. Hospital Waiting Room 911, AM, Restore. Each time he selected one, the carriage shuddered, and through the windows he saw the city's clocks beginning to align, second hands synchronizing, traffic lights cycling in proper order. Then he reached kitchen 6:42 p.m. His finger hovered over the entry. If he restored it, Marcus would break his wrist again. But the city would gain back a critical piece of coherence. Ambulances would arrive on time, trains would meet connections. The woman in the house fire, maybe she'd live, or maybe she'd still die, but at least the system would work the way it was supposed to. The conductor appeared beside him. "The hardest choices are the ones where both paths lead to pain," he said quietly, "but indecision is also a choice." Leo closed his eyes. He thought about Marcus's face when Leo had shown up on Oakmont Street, the relief and gratitude. Then he thought about Mia's mom suspended, about the traffic pile-up, about the slow unravelling of the city's ability to function. He thought about collective time versus personal time, about the difference between optimising your own life and living in a world with other people who also needed the clocks to work. He made his choice. He restored the DMV minute, the history test, the diner conversation. He restored almost everything, giving back minute after minute, feeling the train lurch as the city's timeline straightened. But when he reached the kitchen minute, he hesitated one last time, then moved past it. He couldn't. He restored other treasured moments instead. Peak grades, perfect conversations, small victories, draining his list of optimizations until only the essential ones remained. The kitchen minute, and a handful of others. The city's clocks. Weren't perfect now, but they were close enough. The restored column filled. The train shuddered to a stop. The watch's minute hand hit 12. The conductor nodded slowly. "Close enough," he said. "The city will hold." The doors opened onto the rail yard. Leo stepped off. The ghost tracks began to fade and the train with them, dissolving into moonlight and memory. He stood in the gravel, feeling the absence of the thrumming, and pulled out the watch. The hands had stopped. The mechanism was silent. It was just a piece of broken brass now, inert and heavy. Mia jogged over. "Did it work?" "I think so," Leo said. He looked at his phone. The clock read 12:24 a.m. In the distance he heard a city bus rumbling past on its route, probably on time or close to it. "I didn't restore everything, I couldn't." "I know," she said. They walked back to her car together. Leo's life felt different now, less optimised, more real. Over the next few days he noticed the changes. His math grade dropped back to a B. The conversation with his mum in the hospital waiting room had never happened. She was still stressed, still distant. His text to Mia on the bus had never been sent. They'd reconnected in a different way, messier, slower, but maybe more genuine because of it. And Marcus was safe, wrist unbroken, because Leo had chosen to keep that 1 minute for himself. The city's timing problems didn't disappear entirely, but they stabilised. The news stopped talking about the timing plague. Mia's mum got unsuspended. Traffic lights cycled normally again. Life was humanly messy, full of small delays and minor frustrations, but not haunted. Leo and Mia decided to bury the watch back in the rail yard, under the same pylons where Leo had found it. They dug a shallow hole, wrapped the watch in an old bandana, and placed it carefully in the earth. Mia had written a note on a scrap of paper, and Leo tucked it into the bandana's folds. "Do not borrow what you're not willing to pay back." They covered it with gravel and stood. The pylons rose around them, holding nothing but air, and Leo realised he was okay with that. The trains were gone. The ghost tracks had faded. There were no more minutes to reclaim. He would have to live inside his life instead of constantly rewriting it. Accept the boredom and the mistakes and the wasted time. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "You think anyone else will find it?" Mia asked. "Maybe," Leo said. "Or maybe it stays buried forever." They walked out of the rail yard together, leaving the watch behind. Leo didn't look back. He had a life to live, minute by minute, and he couldn't afford to spend it looking over his shoulder at all the things he might have changed. The city's clocks ticked on, imperfect and synchronized enough, and that would have to be sufficient. Time moved forward. It always did. And Leo, finally, was ready to move with it. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The library smelled like old paper and lemon polish. The kind of smell that made you feel like time moved differently here. Eli pushed his cart down the narrow corridor between the stacks, the wheels squeaking against the scuffed linoleum. It was Thursday evening, nearly closing time, and he was alone in the old wing. Mr. Havers was probably at the front desk doing crosswords and pretending to look busy. Eli liked the quiet, liked that nobody expected him to be anything other than the kid who put books back in alphabetical order. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Nadia asking where he'd been after school. He'd blown off her zine meeting again. The third time this month. He'd meant to go, had actually walked halfway to the journalism room before his chest got tight and he'd turned around, telling himself he'd catch the next one. He was shelving a stack of ancient reference books when he noticed the gap. The rolling ladder stood against the shelf, and behind it, where the wall should have been, there was darkness, a space. Eli glanced back toward the main aisle, heard nothing, and squeezed past the ladder. The hidden aisle was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Dim overhead bulbs gave everything a sepia tone, and the smell changed. Less lemon polish, more ink and dust and something else. Something electric like the air before a storm. The shelves here were different, older, the wood dark and warped, and every single book was wrong. They were too thin for one thing, half the width of normal books, like someone had sliced them down the middle. But it was the spines that made Eli's hands go cold. Names and dates. Sarah Chen, March 3rd, Marcus Brown, July 15th, Olivia Kent, September 8th. Hundreds of them, stretching down the narrow space, and then Ely Morgan, October 19th. His own name, his own last name, in faded gold lettering. October 19th. That was 2 weeks ago. The day of the math presentation, the one where he'd frozen in front of the class and stumbled through his note cards while everyone watched him disintegrate. The day that cemented his reputation as the kid who couldn't handle pressure. Eli pulled the book from the shelf. It was light in his hands, the cover plain brown leather. He opened it. The alarm went off at 6:47 a.m. and Eli reached for his phone, swiping it off with practiced efficiency. He'd been awake for 10 minutes already, mentally rehearsing the opening of his presentation. Last night's practice session with the study group had helped. Study group? Eli didn't have a study group. He kept reading. Marcus had pointed out the weak transition in the middle section, and Sarah had suggested the graph formatting that made everything clearer. He felt nervous, sure, but prepared. He got out of bed and grabbed the note cards from his desk, the ones covered in colour-coded highlighting. The words started to blur. Not because Eli's eyes were tired, but because the ink seemed to be moving, rising off the page, like smoke. The aisle tilted. Eli tried to drop the book, but his hands wouldn't let go, and then everything dissolved into white noise and pressure, and the smell of coffee, and... Eli woke up at his desk, his bedroom desk, morning light coming through the window at the angle that meant early 7 a.m. maybe. His phone alarm was buzzing. He swiped it off and stared at the note cards in front of him, covered in careful highlighting. Blue for main points, yellow for supporting data, green for transitions. He didn't remember making these. "Eli, breakfast!" His mum's voice from downstairs, bright and cheerful in a way that felt off, or maybe felt right. His head hurt. He stumbled through getting ready, his mind racing. This was October 19th. He was living October 19th again, except it wasn't again because this version hadn't happened yet, or had it. The study group. He remembered now. No, he didn't remember. But somehow he knew. Marcus and Sarah and 2 others meeting in the library Tuesday and Wednesday, going over the material together. He could see their faces, could remember Sarah's laugh when Marcus made a dumb joke about polynomials. School happened around him like a dream where you're acting without choosing to act. He walked to math class, sat down. The teacher called his name. He stood up, note cards in hand, and started talking. The words came easily because he'd practiced them, because the study group had helped him organise his thoughts, because in this version of the world he'd done everything right. He didn't freeze, didn't stumble. Got through the whole presentation and sat down to scattered applause, while Mr. Reeves nodded approvingly and wrote something in his grade book. Sarah caught his eye and grinned, giving him a subtle thumbs up. Eli felt sick. This wasn't his life. Or it was his life, but sideways, the version where he had made different choices starting a week ago. The day felt real. The cafeteria smelled the same. His locker combination worked. People treated him like he'd always been this version of himself. But underneath everything was a humming wrongness, like standing on ice that might crack. After school, instead of going home, Eli walked downtown to the library. He had to test something. Mr. Havers was at the desk, but he looked younger somehow, or maybe just less tired. Eli headed straight for the old wing, pushed the cart aside, found the gap behind the rolling ladder. The hidden aisle was still there. The same dim lights, the same two thin books. He found his own name, October 19th, pulled it from the shelf. The book was heavier now, fuller. He flipped to where he'd stopped reading earlier, or later, or whatever, and saw that the pages continued past that point, filling in with the day as he'd lived it. But the last chapter was still blank, still labelled Evening, with nothing but white pages underneath. The book explained it without explaining it. He understood in the way you understand dream logic. To get back, he had to reshelve the book before finishing the story, before living the last chapter. Now, while evening was still beginning. Eli slid the book back into its gap on the shelf. The spine clicked against the wood with a sound like a key turning in a lock, and the world lurched. He was standing in the regular library, the modern, fluorescent-lit library of his actual October 19th, the one where he'd bombed the presentation 6 hours ago. His phone showed 8:47 p.m. The cart was next to him. Everything was back, except his hand hurt. Eli looked down and saw a thin white scar across his left palm, diagonal from thumb to pinky. He had no memory of getting it. Hadn't had it this morning when he woke up. But it was there now, faded like it had been there for months, and when he pressed it with his thumb it felt tender like an old injury does. He stood in the quiet library and started shaking. Over the next 2 weeks, Eli went back 4 times. He couldn't help himself. The aisle called to him every shift, those half-thick books with his name on them lined up like pills he could take to cure different regrets. He jumped to the day he ditched Nadia's meeting and lived it over, showing up and helping lay out the zine, staying late to proofread. When he returned, he owned a copy of that issue with inside jokes scribbled in margins he didn't remember writing. Nadia hugged him when she saw him next and referenced things he only half remembered, but the memories felt real enough when she said them out loud. He jumped to a Saturday where he'd stayed home, and instead lived the version where he'd gone to the skate park with some kids from school. Returned with a scraped elbow and the muscle memory of how to kickflip, his body knowing movements his mind had never learned. He jumped to the day he'd eaten lunch alone and lived it with Kai from English class instead, the quiet kid with the good taste in music. When he came back, Kai nodded to him in the hallway like they did this every day, and Eli found himself humming a song Kai had played from his phone, a song he'd never actually heard in this timeline. Each jump left more leaks, a callus on his fingertips from guitar strings, a teacher asking about the club meeting he'd missed, except he'd never joined that club here, his mum mentioning a conversation they'd had about colleges, a conversation he couldn't quite remember but somehow knew the shape of. Nadia noticed first. She always noticed everything. "When did you get that scar?" she asked, pointing to his palm during lunch. "I don't know, a while ago. It wasn't there last week. I grabbed your hand during the fire drill, remember? No scar. Maybe you didn't notice." "Eli." She was using her journalist voice, the one that meant she was building a case. "Remember last month when you swore we had that huge fight about the deadline, and I kept saying we didn't, that never happened? Yeah, you forgot." "I didn't forget. It didn't happen, but then yesterday I was going through my messages and I found this whole text thread where we did fight about it. Except I don't remember typing those messages. And you," she leaned closer, "you play guitar now? Since when? You told me last year you tried once and hated it." Eli's throat went tight. "People learn things. In 2 weeks? Eli, something's wrong. You're different. Not bad different, just like someone's been editing you." He almost told her then. Wanted to tell her. But the words stuck because explaining the aisle meant explaining what he'd been doing, meant admitting he'd been rewriting days without telling anyone, rewriting their friendship, their shared history. So he changed the subject and Nadia let him, but her eyes stayed sharp and worried. The 5th jump was different. Eli found a book dated from 4 months ago, mid-July, a random Thursday he barely remembered. But when he opened it, the alternate version showed his parents actually talking to each other. In his real timeline, that was the week they'd barely spoken, the week his dad slept on the couch and his mum worked late every night, and Eli had walked around the house like it was made of glass, the week he'd known they were thinking about splitting up but nobody said it out loud. In the book's version, teenage Eli had done something different. had actually asked them what was wrong instead of hiding in his room, had sat at the kitchen table and said, "I know something's wrong and I'm scared," and somehow that had cracked them open enough to talk. Not to fix everything, but to start. Eli jumped without thinking it through. Lived the day as the braver version of himself, the one who could sit in uncomfortable silence and not run away. Watched his parents actually communicate, saw his mum cry, saw his dad reach across the table and take her hand. It hurt to watch, but it hurt less than the cold silence had. When he returned, reshelving the book in that alternate library's hidden aisle, the change hit him like a wave. His parents were different. Still stressed, still struggling with money and work and all the things that never go away, but talking. Going to counselling. He found a family therapist's business card on the fridge. His dad squeezed his shoulder at breakfast and asked how he was doing, really doing, in a way that meant he cared about the answer. But the leak was massive. Eli couldn't remember the layout of his childhood home anymore. The house he'd lived in from age 6 to 12. He knew he'd lived there, could remember it existed. But when he tried to picture the living room, his mind went fuzzy. Like looking at a photo that had been damaged by water, the details smeared away. He mentioned it to his mum and she looked at him weird and said, "The blue couch, the brick fireplace. Eli, we lived there for 6 years." And he nodded, but the picture she painted felt like something someone had told him about, not something he'd experienced. That night he lay in bed, cataloguing the leaks, the scar, the guitar calluses, the skateboard moves, the friendship with Kai, the zine memories, the fixed relationship with his parents. His life was better on paper. Everything had improved. But when he tried to remember who he'd been 6 months ago, before the jumps the picture got fuzzy, like he was photocopying himself over and over and each version lost a little more resolution. The archivist found him on the 7th jump. Eli had gotten bolder, had started exploring books with dates he barely recognised, curious about how different his life could have been. This one was from a year ago, showed a version where his family had moved to a different school district. He jumped just to see, to sample what a completely different school would have been like. The library in this alternate day was smaller, shabbier, budget cuts evident in the worn carpet and flickering lights, but the hidden aisle still existed, and when Eli squeezed behind the ladder he found someone already there. An older man, maybe 40, with grey threading through dark hair and eyes that looked exhausted in a permanent way. He was running his fingers along the spines of books, hundreds of them, all bearing the same name, James Novak. "You're new," the man said. Not a question. Eli froze. "I was just exploring, testing, fixing things." The man smiled without humour. "I did the same. 20 years ago, though by now I'm not sure if it's 20 or 30 or if I ever actually left." He pulled a book from the shelf, riffled through pages covered in dense text. "I started small like you. Fixed a bad test score. Kept my girlfriend from breaking up with me. Got into a better college." He shoved the book back. "Then bigger fixes, career choices. My father's death. There was a version where I got there in time to say goodbye. My sister's wedding. A version where I wasn't in the hospital, where I gave a toast instead of missing everything." "You can't remember which is real," Eli said quietly. "I can't remember anything. Not really." The archivist gestured at the shelves. "I have hundreds of versions of my life on these shelves. Thousands of days I've lived and unlived and relived. At some point I couldn't find the thread back to the original anymore. Too many leaks, too many borrowed details. The person I was before I found this place, he doesn't exist. Just approximations. Why don't you just stop? Leave the books alone? Because I don't know which timeline is mine to return to." The archivist's voice cracked. "I've jumped so many times that every version of my life has been edited. There's no baseline, no core. I'm here because here is the only place that makes sense anymore. The only place where all the versions of me exist at once." Eli backed toward the entrance to the aisle. "I can still get back. My books, they're only from this year. For now?" The archivist caught his arm, gentle but firm. "Listen to me. There's a tipping point. You won't see it coming. One day you'll jump back and realize you can't remember what you were trying to return to. The details you've leaked will outnumber the ones you kept, and you won't know which life is the real one anymore. Stop while you still can." Eli pulled away and ran, found his book, reshelved it, snapped back to his regular library with his heart pounding. But the archivist's words followed him home. Nadia cornered him 2 days later with a poster board covered in sticky notes and string, a conspiracy theorist's nightmare. "I've been tracking it," she said, spreading it across his bedroom floor. "Every time you act weird, every time you mention something that didn't happen, or show a skill you shouldn't have, I thought I was going crazy, but it's you. Something's happening to you, and you won't tell me what." So he told her. About the aisle, the books, the jumps, about living alternate versions of days and reshelving to return. About the leaks. She listened without interrupting, her face cycling through disbelief and anger and fear. "You've been rewriting our friendship," she said finally. "That fight we had about the deadline, that happened in some other version and now I remember it too because of your leaks. Eli, I don't even know if this version of me chose to be your friend or if you edited me into it. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. You're playing God with everyone's memories and you didn't ask. You didn't think about what it means that I'm remembering things I didn't experience." She stood up, folding her arms. "No more. I don't care if it makes things better. No more jumps or I'm done. I can't be friends with someone I can't trust to keep reality consistent." Eli wanted to argue but couldn't. She was right. He'd been so focused on fixing things, on optimizing his life one jump at a time, that he hadn't considered what it cost the people around him, hadn't considered that leaked memories meant their realities were getting rewritten too. "Okay," he said, "no more jumps." But 3 days later he found himself back in the aisle anyway, not planning to jump, just looking, running his fingers over the spines. So many dates, so many versions of himself. And at the far end, one book he hadn't noticed before. Eli Morgan, January 8th. 8 months ago, before he'd ever found the aisle, before any of this started. He pulled it down. The pages showed a version of that day where he'd gotten a letter about a scholarship, a competitive program that would have sent him to a different school entirely, a boarding school for kids good at science. In his real timeline, he'd thrown the letter away. Too scary, too far from home, too much pressure. But in this alternate day he'd applied, had gotten in. The book showed him packing, saying goodbye to Nadia, driving away with his parents. Eli could jump to that day, could live the version where he'd been brave enough to try, see what kind of person he would have become, what kind of life he would have built. The book was there, pages waiting to be read, that other life waiting to be lived. He stood in the dim aisle for a long time, the book heavy in his hands, thought about the archivist lost among his own shelves, thought about Nadia's timeline wall, the evidence of his editing, thought about his parents and the childhood home he couldn't picture clearly anymore, thought about the guitar calluses and the scar and all the other details he'd borrowed from lives he never paid the full price for. Eli closed the book without reading past the first page, slid it back onto the shelf. The spine clicked home and he felt it, the temptation releasing, the door to that particular alternate life closing. He'd never know what that scholarship version of himself had become, never sample that path, and somehow, standing there in the dusty aisle, that felt like the first real choice he'd made in weeks. He brought Nadia back that night, showed her the aisle. She walked along the shelves with her phone flashlight, reading names and dates, her expression caught between wonder and fear. "There's so many," she whispered. Together they found all the books with Eli's name from the past year, 11 of them, some thick with pages from the days he'd lived, some still thin. Eli ran his fingers over each spine, saying a kind of goodbye to the versions of himself inside. The one who aced the math test, the one who went to the skate park, the one who helped with the zine, the one who saved his parents' marriage, all the hymns he'd tried on like clothes. "I can't undo the leaks," he said. "The scars and skills and memories, they're stuck now. I'm stuck with this college life." "So make it yours," Nadia said. "You've got guitar calluses? Actually learn guitar. You've got skateboard muscle memory. Practice until you earn it. You've got a better relationship with your parents. Maintain it. Don't just wear the borrowed parts. Live into them." Mr. Havers was waiting when they came out of the old wing. He looked up from his crossword and studied them both for a long moment. "Found the aisle," he said. Not a question. "You knew," Eli said. "I knew." Mr. Havers set down his pencil. "I was young once too. Young and full of regrets. The aisle shows up for people like us. People who can't stop asking, what if?" He stood, pulled a key ring from his desk drawer, selected an old brass key. "I'll lock it. Not permanently, the aisle doesn't work like that. Can't be destroyed. but I'll lock it for now, give you time to live forward instead of sideways." They watched him walk into the old wing, heard the click of the key in a lock Eli had never noticed before. When Mr. Havers came back, he pressed the key into Eli's palm. "Hold on to it. When you're older, when you've lived enough real days that the regrets don't burn so hot, you can decide what to do with it, but not now, not while you're still building a life." At home that night, Eli started a new notebook, plain, spiral-bound from the drugstore. He wrote the date at the top of the first page, November 7th, and started journaling. Not the highlight reel, not the optimized version, just what actually happened. The awkward conversation with Kai where they ran out of things to say, the guitar practice where his fingers fumbled the chords, the dinner where his parents were good but not perfect, trying but not fixed. All of it messy and real and lived only once in this timeline, in this version of his life. When he finished writing, the ink just sat there on the page, didn't shimmer or smoke or pull him anywhere. The words were just words, the day was just a day, and tomorrow would come without him having to shelve anything to get there. Eli closed the notebook and looked at his hands, the scar across his palm, the calluses from guitar strings, evidence of days he'd borrowed, choices he hadn't actually made but now had to live with. They were part of him now, leaked in from alternate lives, and maybe that was okay. Maybe everyone's life was a kind of collage anyway, built from chances taken and not taken, from the person you are and the people you might have been. The library key sat on his desk, brass and heavy and full of possibility. Someday he might use it again, might need to test another path, sample another version. But not tonight. Tonight he had this life, this exact configuration of choices and leaks and mistakes and small victories. It wasn't optimized, it wasn't the best possible version, but it was his, earned and lived, and for now that was enough. The next morning, Eli woke up to his alarm without the dizzy feeling of not knowing which timeline he was in. Just Friday, November 8th. His room looked the same as it had when he'd fallen asleep. Same posters, same mess, same crack in the ceiling he'd been staring at since middle school. Nothing had shifted in the night. No new memories had arrived unbidden. The relief felt almost physical. At breakfast, his dad asked about the math test coming up next week. A normal question, no hidden weight behind it. Eli answered honestly, he was worried about it, hadn't studied enough yet, and his dad offered to quiz him over the weekend. Simple, linear, a conversation that would stay exactly as it happened, no alternate versions bleeding through. "You okay?" his mum asked, studying him over her coffee. "You seem different lately. More settled, maybe?" Eli thought about how to answer that. He was different. He was a person built from pieces of a dozen timelines, carrying skills and scars from days he'd only half lived. But he was also more himself than he'd been in months, paradoxically, because he'd stopped trying to optimize every choice into the best possible version. "I'm okay," he said, "just figuring some stuff out." School felt strange in its ordinariness. Kai nodded to him in the hallway and Eli nodded back, and this time, when they ran out of things to say at lunch, Eli didn't panic or wish he could, rewind and try again. He just sat with the awkward silence until Kai pulled out his phone and showed him a new song, and they listened together without forcing conversation. It was fine, not perfect, but fine. In English class, Sarah from the study group, the one that existed in some timelines but not others, asked him a question about the homework. Eli realised he had memories of knowing her from the math presentation jump, memories of inside jokes they'd shared, but in this actual timeline they'd barely spoken. The leaked familiarity made him answer too casually, like they were friends, and she looked confused for a second before smiling politely and turning away. That was going to keep happening, Eli realised. He'd keep running into the edges of his collage life, places where the borrowed pieces didn't quite match the actual history. He'd have to navigate that, figure out how to explain away the inconsistencies or slowly build real relationships to match the leaked memories. It would be awkward and complicated, and there was no book he could open to see how it turned out. After school, instead of going to the library, Eli went to the music store downtown. He'd been avoiding it because the guitar calluses felt like a lie, a skill he'd stolen from an alternate version of himself. But Nadia's words kept echoing. Make it yours. He browsed the used guitars, found a beaten-up acoustic that fit his budget, and bought it along with the beginner's instruction book. At home, he sat on his bed and tried to play. His fingers knew where to go. The muscle memory from the leaked timeline was real enough, but the sound that came out was terrible. Buzzing strings, muted notes, everything slightly off. The alternate Eli had apparently been better at this. But this Eli, the real one, would have to practice. Would have to earn the skill his body already half remembered. He played for an hour, fumbling through basic chords, until his fingertips hurt and his mother knocked on the door to ask if he could please take a break. The frustration felt good, though. Clean. This was him actually learning something, not borrowing it from a life he'd visited for a day. His phone buzzed. Nadia. Want to work on layouts tomorrow? Actual timeline version. Promise to remember all of it. Eli smiled. Yeah. Coffee shop at 10. Bring the guitar. I want to hear how bad you actually are. Saturday morning, Eli met Nadia at the coffee shop with the acoustic slung over his shoulder in its cheap gig bag. She was already there, laptop open, surrounded by printouts and marker sets. The zine was coming together, a November issue about things people regretted which felt almost too on the nose. Play something, Nadia said, grinning. I'm terrible. I know. That's why I want to hear it. I want to hear the real you being terrible, not the borrowed you being adequate. So Eli pulled out the guitar and butchered a simple chord progression, while two people at the next table looked over with expressions somewhere between amused and pained. Nadia laughed so hard she nearly knocked over her coffee, and Eli laughed too, and it felt right. This was a real moment, fully lived, no alternate version hovering underneath. They worked on the zine for 3 hours. Eli wrote a short piece about regret, carefully not mentioning anything about libraries or alternate timelines, focusing instead on the weight of wondering what if. Nadia edited it with her usual ruthless precision, crossing out entire paragraphs and scribbling suggestions in the margins. They argued about word choices and layout decisions, and Eli realised this was the first time he'd done this with her in his actual timeline, not a borrowed one. Every previous memory of working on the zine together was a leak, a false history. But this was real. Can I ask you something? Nadia said during a lull, wrapping her hands around her second coffee. Do you regret it, using the aisle? Eli considered. The honest answer was complicated. I regret how much I used it. I regret not thinking about how it affected other people. But I don't know if I regret finding it in the first place. It taught me something. What? That optimized isn't the same as lived. All those alternate days, they were better versions on paper. Better grades, better relationships, better choices. But they weren't mine. I didn't pay for them. And trying to collect all the best possible versions of myself just meant I stopped being any version consistently. Nadia nodded slowly. The archivist guy you told me about, he's still there? In the aisle? I think so. Stuck between all his versions. That's sad. Yeah. They sat with that for a moment. Then Nadia pulled out her timeline board, the one she'd made tracking all of Eli's inconsistencies. I've been thinking about what to do with this. It's evidence of something impossible, right? The kind of thing I could write about, make a whole issue around, but I don't think I will. Why not? Because it's your story, and also because some things are better as lived experiences than documented ones. If I wrote about it, tried to prove it, it would become about the mystery and the magic, but the actual important part is just you figuring out how to live with your choices. That's not a mystery. That's just being human. She folded up the board and stuck it in her bag. But I'm keeping it, for the record, in case you ever get tempted to unlock that aisle again and need someone to show you what happened last time. Thank you, Eli said, and meant it. That afternoon, Eli's parents asked him to come to their therapy session. Not to participate, just to sit in the waiting room, to be present as they worked on things. It was part of the commitment they'd made. The leaked version of them, the ones from the timeline where Eli had been brave enough to ask what was wrong. Except now he had to be brave enough to maintain it, to keep showing up, to not let the borrowed fix dissolve, back into comfortable distance. He sat in the waiting room reading his English assignment while his parents talked to their counsellor in the other room. Through the walls he could hear the murmur of voices, occasional raised words, then quiet again. It was uncomfortable. He wanted to leave, to go back to his room and pretend everything was fine, but he stayed. That was the work now. Staying present, living forward, not escaping into alternate versions where the hard parts had already been resolved. When they came out, his mother's eyes were red, but she was smiling. His father looked exhausted, but lighter somehow. They took him out for pizza and didn't talk about the session, just ate and joked and argued about toppings like a normal family. It wasn't perfect. The leaked fix hadn't made everything magically better, but it had opened a door, and now they all had to choose to keep walking through it, day by day, in this timeline only. Sunday, Eli practiced guitar until his fingers ached. Monday, he showed up early to school and asked Sarah if she wanted to actually be study partners, building the relationship from scratch instead of relying on leaked memories. Tuesday, he went to the skate park and fell a dozen times trying to relearn tricks his muscles remembered, but his mind didn't fully understand. Wednesday, he wrote in his journal about all of it. The failures, the awkward moments, the small victories that didn't feel particularly victorious in the moment. The brass key stayed on his desk, catching light from his window. Sometimes Eli picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, felt its weight. The temptation was still there, would probably always be there. The knowledge that he could unlock the aisle, pull down a book, sample a better version of any day that wasn't going well. But knowing he could do it and choosing not to, that was its own kind of freedom. The freedom of accepting that this life, this exact sequence of days, was the only one he'd fully inhabit. Messy and imperfect and unrevisable. His. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The storm hit on a Tuesday, shrieking in from the northeast with the kind of fury that made even Grandad Owen, who'd spent 40 years as lightkeeper, pull the curtains and turn up the radio. By Wednesday morning the harbour looked scoured clean. Boats that had been swaying gently at their moorings now sat askew, lines tangled, one dinghy beached halfway up the public steps. Marin found her father already down at the shop, assessing damage to the hull of Mrs. Chen's sailboat. Could have been worse, he said, running his hand along a fresh gouge. Jetty took the worst of it. Marin walked out along the breakwater after helping him secure loose tools. The old lighthouse rose behind her, its lamp long since automated, Grandad's cottage at its base looking small against the grey sky. The jetty stones were slick with kelp and smelled of salt and diesel, but something caught the morning light differently than it had before. Where algae had crusted the rocks for as long as Marin could remember, the storm had scrubbed them nearly bare. And there, just below the high tide line, was brass. She crouched, tracing the metal with one finger. It was a disc, maybe 2 feet across, bolted directly into the jetty stones. Concentric rings were engraved with tiny figures. Constellations, she realised, her heart quickening. Orion, the Pleiades, Cassiopeia. Each constellation sat in its own segment, arranged around a central pin that looked like it could rotate. A single line was etched deep across the diameter, pointing north. Words in old script ran along the outer rim. As above, so below, let tide keep true. Jules is going to lose his mind, she said aloud. She took photos from every angle as the tide crept in, then texted her best friend. By the time the water covered the disc completely, Jules was already biking down from his house on the hill, his drone case strapped to his back. An astrarium, Jules said that evening, both of them perched on the jetty as the tide pulled back again. But why bolt it into a breakwater? These things were for calculating planetary positions, not... Look. Marin pointed to a small notch in the outer ring, now exposed as the water receded. There's a mechanism. I think it only engages when the tide hits a certain height. Jules leaned closer, his headlamp illuminating the intricate gearing. Low tide, has to be. When was the last midnight low? Marin pulled up her tide app. Tonight, in about 4 hours. They brought Grandad Owen down at 11:30, the old man moving carefully over the uneven stones. He stood looking at the brass disc for a long time, saying nothing, while Marin and Jules waited. Your grandmother, he finally said, used to tell me the jetty remembered where it used to be. I thought she meant metaphorically. He touched the central pin, then withdrew his hand. Be careful what you align, Marin. The coast and the charts don't always agree, and there's usually a reason. You knew this was here? Suspected. Never had the courage to look, he squeezed her shoulder. Low tide's in 20 minutes. I'll wait up at the cottage. If you're not back by dawn, I'm calling the Coast Guard. Magic or no magic. The tide retreated, leaving shallow puddles on the flat stones around the astrarium. Marin lay on her stomach, checking her star app, then looking up at the November sky. Orion hung low in the east, brilliant even with the harbour lights. She could see his reflection in the largest puddle, wavering slightly. Okay, she said. If I rotate this so Orion on the disc matches Orion in the puddle. You're going to try it? Right now? Jules grabbed his phone. At least let me get the GPS coordinates locked first. She waited while he fussed with settings, her hand on the central pin. It moved smoothly when she pulled it up, releasing the rings. The brass felt warm despite the cold air. Slowly she rotated the disc, watching the tiny engraved Orion turn to align with the reflection below. Cassiopeia next, the Pleiades. One by one, the constellations matched their watery mirrors. Marin, the meridian line has to point north when you... The first small wave of the incoming tide crossed the engraved line. The world tilted. Marin's stomach dropped like she'd missed a step in the dark. Sound muffled, then roared back, but different. The electric hum of the harbour lights was gone. In its place, the slap of water against wood, the creak of rope and voices distant but clear, speaking in the particular careful way of people working at night. She looked up. Oil lamps hung on posts along the shore. The lighthouse beam swept the harbour, but slower than she was used to, more golden. Her father's boat shop wasn't there. Instead, rough scaffolding marked where the jetty met the land, and men in dark coats were hauling stones into position. Jules? Her voice came out wrong, too loud, panicked. But Jules wasn't there. She was alone on the jetty, the brass disc under her hands still warm. The date in her mind, it had to be. She looked at the constellation pattern, tried to remember which years matched this configuration. Late 1800s, 1880s maybe. The realization hit her like cold water. She was there. Actually there. A man appeared on the jetty behind her, carrying a shuttered lantern. "You there? This is a construction site. What's your—" He stopped, taking in her jeans, her waterproof jacket, her LED headlamp. "What in God's name are you wearing?" Marin scrambled backward, nearly slipping. Her hands found the astrarium, and she did the only thing she could think of. She checked her star app. No signal, useless, and tried to remember what the sky looked like from her own time 4 hours ago. She rotated the disc frantically, approximating, guessing. Orion higher, Cassiopeia more to the west. The central pin clicked. She held her breath as another wave crossed the meridian line. The tilt, the drop, the roar. She was back. Jules was still bent. Over his phone, fingers frozen mid-swipe. He looked up. "Did you feel—" "I went back." The words tumbled out. "Jules, I went back. There was someone there. And the lighthouse. It was real. It was—" "Back where?" But his GPS was showing an error. "That's weird. The coordinates are off by like 15 centimetres. Let me recalibrate." They found the discrepancy in the morning light. The mooring ring that Mrs. Chen had been complaining was too far from her usual dock position. Marin had tied boats to it 100 times, always a good metre clear of the jetty edge, was now half embedded in the stones, as if the rock had grown around it. "Sensor error," Jules said, but he didn't sound convinced. Marin touched the brass disc, already disappearing again under the rising tide. "We changed something. Coming back, I mean. We changed where the jetty thinks it should be." They tested it carefully over the next 2 weeks, making small jumps. Just an hour back, then 2, then a few years. Each time Marin aligned the astrarium to match a past sky, she'd slip into that night, stay for minutes, then realign to return. And each time, something small would shift. A ladder no longer quite reached the water. The angle of the boat ramp seemed steeper. Jules started keeping obsessive overlays, comparing historical harbour surveys with current measurements, and the maps began to disagree with themselves in ways that made him mutter about subduction and sediment load, until Marin reminded him they were using a magic brass disc, not geology. The first time they encountered Harbour Master Huxley properly was on a jump back to September 1882. Marin had gotten better at navigating the past, bringing a period-appropriate coat and pinning her hair back. Huxley was a compact man with magnificent sideburns and a surveyor's eye, standing on the jetty with a notebook sketching sight lines. "The current," he was saying to a worker, "comes through at the wrong angle. We'll place stone here, here and here." His pencil stabbed the air. "To redirect it. The harbour must be perfected." Marin watched him work through 3 visits, always from a distance. He was methodical, obsessive, piling rocks and driving pilings according to some internal vision of harbour perfection that didn't quite match the water's preferences. And when she returned each time, Jules would show her new discrepancies. The erosion pattern on the south beach had changed. The channel markers had to be repositioned. The harbour was being redrawn, night by night, trip by trip. In the present day, Ms. Corbett arrived with rolled plans and a laptop full of simulations. The coastal engineer spread her designs across the community centre table, while the harbour commission leaned in. A new seawall, an expanded marina, all of it backed by models showing storm surge projections, erosion rates, economic impact. The current configuration, Corbett said, laser pointer dancing across cross-sections, leaves us vulnerable. My modelling shows that with strategic hardening here and here, we reduce flood risk by 40%. Marin stood at the back of the room with her father. She could see the problem immediately. Corbett's baseline maps didn't match the harbour anymore. The channel was slightly wider than her model showed. The beach access was in a different spot. Small changes, but they would compound. The seawall would be built for a harbour that no longer existed. "We need to stop," Marin told Jules that night. They were at the lighthouse cottage, Grandad Owen pouring tea while Jules spread his latest overlay across the kitchen table. "Look at this accumulation," Jules said. 15 trips and we've shifted the harbour mouth almost a metre northwest. Do you know what that does to current patterns? To sediment deposition? Which is exactly why we could fix it." Jules looked up, his eyes bright with that particular intensity that meant he'd been thinking about something for hours. "Not stop, fix it. We've been random, but what if we were precise? We've got every harbour survey ever done. We can calculate the most stable configuration, the one that's safest and keeps everything people need. Then we make one big trip, adjust the past and lock it in." Grandad Owen set down his mug. "And if you get it wrong, then we try." "No!" The old man's voice was sharp. "You don't get to try again. Every change costs something. You've already moved things that people rely on. What happens when you shift something that puts a boat on rocks, or a house in a flood zone?" Marin felt the weight of it settle on her chest. "But Corbett's seawall will be worse. She's designing for a harbour that doesn't exist anymore because we changed it, and if we don't fix what we broke—" "So fix it," Grandad Owen said, "but carefully and finally, because a place isn't a puzzle you can solve. It's alive, it changes, and you need to let it rest." They worked for 3 days straight. Jules compiled every historical map, every survey, every photograph. He built a composite that showed where the harbour had been most stable across centuries, which configurations had weathered storms best, where natural currents wanted to flow. Marin charted which changes in the past would create which outcomes in the present, tracing chains of cause and effect through Huxley's obsessive notebooks that she'd photographed on her trips. The plan was delicate. One trip to one specific night in 1883. They would intercept Huxley before his most aggressive intervention, a massive stone revetment he'd placed to block what he called a troublesome side current, but that Jules's data showed was actually essential for flushing sediment. They'd convince him to leave it alone, to place just one carefully positioned barrier instead, and let nature handle the rest. Then Marin would realign the astrarium to match the current night sky exactly, locking the harbour into this new old configuration. "It'll protect from floods," Jules said, pointing to his models, "keep the boatyard viable, preserve beach access, and it matches the most stable historical average by like 92%. And Corbett's seawall? Won't be necessary, or at least her models will show different results, and maybe she'll design something that actually fits." The night they chose was cold and clear, the kind of November midnight where stars seem close enough to touch. Marin came prepared with careful notes, star charts, and a speech for Huxley that she'd practiced until her father asked if she was rehearsing for a play. Jules would stay in the present, watching his GPS coordinates, ready to document the change. She aligned the disk, matching the past sky pattern ring by ring. The meridian line gleamed in her headlamp. The wave crossed it. The drop. The tilt. The arrival. 1883 smelled of coal smoke and fish and wet stone. Huxley was exactly where Jules's research said he'd be, standing with 2 workers beside a growing pile of rocks. His lantern cast sharp shadows. "Harbour Master," Marin called, trying to make her voice confident. He turned, and she saw him clock her strange clothes, her impossible presence, but he was a practical man. "You're from the lighthouse?" "Sort of. I need to talk to you about the revetment. It's essential. The current is essential too." She pulled out Jules' printed diagrams, anachronistic and obvious, but Huxley was already reaching for them. "The side current flushes sediment. If you block it completely, you'll create a dead zone that fills in. But if you place just this one barrier, here, she pointed, you'll redirect the problematic surge without killing the flow. He studied the papers, his finger tracing the flow lines. These are remarkably detailed. How did you? I've seen what happens if you don't, Marin said. Please, just this one change. Let the harbour be what it wants to be. Huxley looked at her for a long moment, then at his men, then at the stone pile. One barrier, precisely positioned. Precisely, Marin agreed. She helped them place it, though the workers gave her baffled looks. It took 2 hours. When it was done, Huxley made her mark it on his charts, committing to the change in his meticulous hand. Then she walked back to the jetty. The sky was changing, real clouds rolling in from the west, occluding stars. Marin felt panic spike. She needed clear sky to align the astrarium properly to match tonight's configuration back in 2025. She pulled out her notes, her star app useless across the temporal gap, and tried to remember. Orion at this angle. Cassiopeia there. The Pleiades, where were they behind the clouds? She made her best guess, rotating the rings, her hands shaking. Back in the present, Jules was watching his screen. Corbett had spent the day staking out preliminary markers for the seawall, working from her models. If this didn't work, the Commission would vote tomorrow on a design that no longer matched. Reality. On the jetty in 1883, Marin locked the pin. She could hear the tide rushing in louder than before. One clean wave, that's what she needed. One smooth surge to cover the disk completely. The clouds broke just enough for her to see Orion's belt, and she made one last tiny adjustment. The wave came, it crossed the meridian line and flooded the brass disc in one motion. The world yanked her home. Marin landed hard on the present-day jetty, gasping. Jules was there immediately, grabbing her arm. "Are you okay? You were gone for... How long were you gone?" "Hours, Jules, the clouds, I had to guess. Look," he held up his phone. The harbour spread below them, and it was different. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The channel was wider, cleaner. The boat shop sat properly against the water, the dock a functional length. The public steps curved down to a beach that looked slightly different but completely usable. And on Jules's screen, his GPS overlay was settling, coordinates stabilising into a configuration that matched. Marin pulled out her phone, multiple historical surveys all at once. It averaged, Jules breathed. The changes propagated and averaged into a composite. Look, this matches the 1891 survey and the 1947 survey and the stable period in the 80s. We made a compromise shape. They scrambled up to the harbour office where Corbett was working late, her laptop open. She was frowning at her screen, running simulations again. "That's odd," she was saying to her assistant. "The erosion patterns are showing completely different." She looked up as Marin and Jules appeared in the doorway. "Can I help you?" "Your seawall design," Marin said. "You'll want to check your baseline data. I think the harbour's been surveyed more recently than you're accounting for." Corbett pulled up her models, compared them to fresh measurements her team had taken that afternoon. Her frown deepened. "These don't match at all. The entire channel geometry is..." She grabbed her phone. "We're going to need to resurvey before the Commission vote. These projections are wrong." Over the next week, Marin watched the harbour settle. Small daily changes still happened, tides shifted sand, storms moved rocks. But the big jump stopped. The shoreline stabilised into its new shape, and Jules's obsessive measurements confirmed what Marin could feel. It was done. The harbour had found a configuration it wanted to keep, one that echoed multiple pasts and created a more stable future. Corbett came back with new designs, smaller, adaptive. "Working with the natural currents instead of against them," she explained to the Commission. "My initial models were too aggressive. This approach is more resilient." The vote passed, but it was for something different than she'd originally planned. Something that fit the harbour as it was now, not as it had been or might have been. Grandad Owen found Marin at the lighthouse cottage one evening, both of them looking down at the jetty. The brass disc was visible at low tide, gleaming. "You did well," he said. "But you're done now. Yes?" "Yes," Marin said. She meant it. "Your grandmother told me once that the old keepers felt the jetty move. Little shifts, generation to generation. I wonder if they had the same choice you did, and if they made it. Did they choose right? You're here, aren't you? The harbour's still here." He put his arm around her shoulders. That suggests they chose carefully. Marin and Jules went down at the next low tide with a careful plan. They marked the astrarium's location on a protected historical site map, documenting it as a significant nautical artefact. Then they positioned stones around it, not covering it completely but making it harder to access casually, harder for someone to stumble upon and turn without understanding what they were doing. The tide would still wash over it, the stars would still reflect in the puddles, but it would take deliberate effort, the kind of effort that meant whoever found it next would hopefully have the same respect for consequences that Marin had learned. Jules ran his final overlay, showing the harbour's shape evolution across their 2 weeks of trips and the final settled form. "It looks like a star," he said. From above, an irregular star pattern. Marin could see it. The jetties, the beach curves, the channel mouth. They formed a shape that echoed the brass disc's constellation rings, time and tide written into stone and sand. "We should go," Jules said. "Your dad wants help with Mrs. Chen's boat." They walked back along the jetty as the tide came in. Behind them, cold water covered the brass disc, and the meridian line disappeared under the surge. The harbour swayed gently, boats rocking at their moorings, waves lapping at stones that had, finally, agreed on where they wanted to be. Marin felt the weight lift from her chest, that constant background worry that something might shift when she wasn't looking. The harbour was done moving, at least done moving in ways that she had caused. The lighthouse beams swept across the water, and for just a moment Marin thought she saw it moving at that older, slower pace, golden instead of white. But then it was normal again, and she decided it was just her memory, just the echoes of all those nights in the past overlapping with the present. Which was fine. Some things should echo, some changes should leave traces. That's how you knew they mattered. She helped her father until dark, then walked home along the shore counting tide pools and checking star positions out of habit. Orion was rising right on schedule. The Pleiades hung where they belonged, and below them, the harbour held its shape, a compromise written in stone and star reflections finally allowed to rest. "The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy." The workshop stood at the end of a gravel lane where the county road gave up on pavement and let the woods reclaim it. Jules had walked this path 100 times to visit Master Alder in summers past, carrying mason jars of wild blackberry and listening to the old man's stories about bees that knew the moon better than any almanac. Now the keys hung heavy in Jules's pocket, brass and iron, still warm from Aunt Mara's hand when she'd pressed them there that morning, with eyes too tired for grief. The door groaned open on leather hinges, and the smell hit first. Beeswax and honey, linseed oil, cedar shavings, and beneath it all something metallic and precise, the ghost of 1,000 wound springs. Dust moved in the slant light like pollen suspended in amber. Against the far wall stood the extractor, a radial drum of stained oak and tarnished brass, its treadle worn smooth by decades of feet. Pendulum clocks lined every surface, some stopped at different hours, others ticking in a rhythm that wasn't quite synchronized but close enough to sound like a single vast heartbeat with a limp. Jules set down the duffel bag, the one with drumsticks poking from the side pocket, and a bullet journal wrapped in a bandana to keep the pages from dog-earing. 16 years old and already cataloguing the world in columns and arrows, mapping cause to effect like a good scientist should, or at least like Tali always said a good scientist should. Tali from Physics Club, who could tap out 120 BPM on a table edge without counting, who built motion sensors from old phone parts and called it recycling. Tali would have questions about this place. Jules already had questions. The hive sat in the yard beyond the moon window, that odd circular pane Alder had cut into the south wall at exactly the angle to frame moonrise over the back field. 6 white boxes stacked in a configuration that didn't quite match the county extension pamphlets Jules had studied for 4-H. The frames inside, when Jules finally worked up the courage to crack the first hive, were wrong in a way that made the skin prickle. Not disease wrong, not pest wrong, pattern wrong. The comb cells formed rings instead of the standard hexagonal sheets. 29 cells in the first ring, 30 in another, embossed and perfect, each one catching light at a slightly different angle. Jules ran a gloved finger across them, and the hive hummed, a sound that wasn't quite angry, wasn't quite content, but felt like both at once. like a cord held too long, waiting for resolution. Inside the workshop, Alder's ledger lay open on the workbench, leather cracked at the spine, pages dense with cramped handwriting and musical notation. At the top of the first page, underlined 3 times, the old man had written, "Synodic Rhythm 2953 Solar Days." The comb remembers. Below that, a table. BPM down the left margin, lunar day across the top, corrections in red ink for temperature and humidity. At 58.2 BPM, the notation read, D1, new, moon, cold wax, listen for the A-flat undertone. At 116.4 BPM, D29, waning crescent, warm, the hive will resist. Jules pulled the bullet journal from the bag and started copying, hand cramping around the pencil, drumsticks forgotten. The numbers formed their own rhythm. Every lunar day had its tempo. Every tempo had its corrections, and in the margins, Alder's spidery notes hinted at something else entirely. The extractor is not for honey. The honey is for moonrise. Do not confuse the two. 3 wax cylinders sat on a shelf above the workbench, labelled in Alder's hand. Comb Song D7, Comb Song D14, Comb Song D22. Jules had seen phonograph cylinders before, heard Edison recordings crackle through a horn at the county museum. These were different, handmade. The wax a deep amber that caught light like the honey itself, etched with grooves that seemed too fine, too regular. There was a mandrel attachment for the extractor's drive shaft, a playback head mounted on a gooseneck arm. It took 20 minutes to figure out the setup, another 10 to work up the nerve to spin the drum. The voice that emerged from the horn was Alder's, but younger, stronger, touched with an accent Jules couldn't place. Day 7, first quarter waxing. The comb sings in E major when the moon is ascendant. Spin at 87.6 to match the standing wave. Remember, boy, you're not making honey move. You're making time remember where it's been. The drum turned, the voice spoke through a haze of surface noise, and beneath it all the comb in the extractor, the lunar frame Jules had seated there without really thinking, began to hum. Not loud, not even quite audible unless you held your breath and leaned close. But it was there, a frequency that made the dust lift from the workbench and hang, suspended like the room itself was holding its breath. Jules looked down. The treadle was moving under one foot, pumping in a rhythm the body knew before the brain caught up. Drummer's instinct. 87.6 BPM. Close enough to the written tempo that the frame's hum shifted, deepened, locked into phase with the turning drum. The pendulum clocks all around stopped ticking. The dust hung. The workshop tilted, not like an earthquake, but like the world had suddenly remembered it was supposed to be somewhere else. And the somewhere else was here, 7 days ago, or 7 days forward, or 7 days sideways into a pocket the calendar had forgotten to mark. When the room settled, the light had changed. Still afternoon, but different. The dust on the windowsill formed the lines Jules hadn't made yet. Outside, the hives stood in the same configuration, but the landing boards were crowded with bees returning from forage, their hum pitched higher, more urgent. Jules stumbled to the door and looked out. The field beyond was full of goldenrod, the kind that bloomed in late September, except it was early October now, wasn't it? Had been before. The bullet journal's last entry was dated October 3rd. This was September 26th. The phone in Jules' pocket had no signal. Not no bars, but no concept of signal at all. The screen locked on a clock that read 4:47 p.m. and wouldn't update. 7 days back. Day 7 of the lunar cycle. First quarter waxing. The comb had sung and the room had listened. Alder's note said, "To return, feed the queen a teaspoon of fresh present-day honey at moonrise. Not past honey, not future honey. Today's jar, from the shelf, unopened until the moment. Warm it in your hands. Let her taste now." Jules ran back inside. The honey shelf held jars labelled by date, Alder's careful script noting moon phase and nectar source. October 3rd, 2024. Wildflower plus aster. The jar's wax seal was intact. Jules cracked it with shaking hands, dipped a silver teaspoon to the level mark engraved on the handle, and waited. The moon window showed only daylight. Hours yet before the moon would clear the tree line. Hours to stand in a workshop that was 7 days younger than it should be, watching dust settle and clocks refuse to tick. When moonrise came, It came as a sliver of white cresting the field's edge, cold and sharp. Jules opened the nearest hive, carefully the way Alder had taught, smoke first, gentle hands, and found the queen by the glow of a red-filtered headlamp. She was larger than the workers, more golden, moving with the slow confidence of something that knew its own importance. Jules held the teaspoon to her mandibles and she drank, delicate and sure, and the workshop shuddered and untilted, and the clocks all started again at once, a cacophony that resolved into their usual half-synchronized beat. October 3rd, 4:47 p.m. The phone signal bars flickered back. 17 missed texts from Aunt Mara, increasingly worried. But when Jules checked the message timestamps, they were wrong. Garbage day was supposed to be Thursday. Mara's shift at the clinic was Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday. Now the calendar on the phone showed garbage collection on Tuesday, and Mara's schedule had shifted to Monday, Thursday, Sunday, and the memories in Jules's head said both were true, or had been true, or would be true depending on which week you asked. Aunt Mara found Jules sitting on the workshop steps at dusk, bullet journal open, trying to map the paradox. "You missed dinner," she said, not unkindly, and then frowned. "Wait. No. That's tomorrow, isn't it?" She checked her own phone and the confusion in her face was sharp enough to ache. "I could have sworn my shift was this morning." "It was," Jules said. "It will be. I think I broke the week." The explanation took until full dark, and Mara didn't believe it until Jules showed her the ledger, played the wax cylinder, spun the extractor without any frame seated, and demonstrated how the room stayed perfectly still, unimpressed. "Alder was always strange," Mara said finally, "but he wasn't a liar. If he wrote it, there's truth in it somewhere." She looked at the lunar comb frame, still damp with honey, humming its faint chord, in the cooling air. "Can you fix it?" "I don't know," Jules said, "but I think I need help." Tali arrived the next morning with a duffel bag of sensors, a contact microphone, a phone running an open-source tachometer app, and a vibrating metronome strapped to one wrist. "Show me," Tali said, and Jules did. They spent 3 hours mapping the extractor's actual BPM against the dial settings, discovering that Alder's corrections were essential. Warm wax lowered the effective tempo by 1.2 to 1.8 BPM depending on ambient humidity. Cold wax raised it, and the bees themselves influenced the standing wave in ways that defied simple measurement. Tali stuck the contact mic to the drum's centre boss and fed the output through a spectrum analyzer on the phone. "There," Tali said, pointing to a peak that wobbled between 426 and 429 Hz. "That's your lock frequency. When the comb matches that, you're in phase. That's your door." They practiced with short jumps. Day 14, the full moon eve, spinning at 108.7 BPM with corrections for a warm afternoon and active foragers. The room tilted, and they arrived at the night of last year's harvest festival. The field beyond lit with bonfires and voices singing songs Jules half remembered from childhood. They stayed only minutes, long enough for Tali to record the ambient sound, and for Jules to retrieve a pendulum bob that had fallen behind the workbench in that timeline. At moonrise, Jules fed the queen and they returned, and the week reshuffled again. Garbage day moved to Friday. The clinic schedule floated. Tali's physics club lab session, definitely scheduled for Wednesday morning, now showed on Monday afternoon, and Tali's memories insisted both were correct. "This is getting worse," Tali said, staring at the phone's calendar, watching events drift like loose papers in a breeze. "Every jump reorders the last 7 days. If we keep testing, we'll lose track entirely." "Alder knew," Jules said, flipping through the ledger to a page near the back, the ink darker, more recent. "He calls it the 7-frame stitch. 7 consecutive lunar days, visited in order within one present day, then one clean return at moonrise. It resequences everything, resets the week. 7 jumps in one day?" Tali's voice went flat. "That's 7 moonrises. Impossible. Not moonrises, jumps. We visit 7 dates, stay just long enough to mark them, and return here between each one. Then tonight, at actual moonrise now, one final return with fresh honey. The pattern stitches the week back into sequence. And if we miss the BPM? If the comb doesn't lock?" Jules looked at the extractor, its drum scarred and patient. "Then we're stuck, or the week stays broken, or both. Alder's notes say BPM tolerance is plus or minus 0.2. Tali, You can tap 120 BPM on a table for 10 minutes without drifting. We can do this. We'd better, Tali said, because that afternoon Ms. Braun arrived. She came in a white pickup with Braun Industrial Apiary stencilled on the door, pulling up the gravel lane with the confidence of someone who owned everything she looked at. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed, boots polished despite the mud season. She introduced herself to Aunt Mara on the porch and didn't wait for an invitation before walking toward the hives. Jules intercepted her at the moon window. Private property, Jules said, keeping voice level, hands loose. Drummer's hands ready to catch a beat or throw it back. Master Alder kept exceptional stock, Ms. Braun said, not quite smiling. I've been trying to acquire his queens for years. Now that he's passed, my condolences, truly. I'd like to make an offer. Fair market value, plus a premium for the, unique genetics. They're not for sale. Ms. Brown's eyes flicked to the extractor visible through the workshop door to the lunar frames stacked beside it. I run a modern operation, dear. Temperature control, artificial comb, maximised yield. Alder's methods were quaint, but productivity demands efficiency. I can give these bees the resources they deserve. She pulled a folded paper from her jacket. I filed a courtesy inspection with the county. If your apiary doesn't meet current standards, they'll need to be relocated, for public health. When? Aunt Mara asked from the porch, voice tight. End of week. Friday, I believe. Or was it Monday? The county office has been disorganised lately. Ms. Braun smiled then, thin and knowing. I'm sure you'll pass. But if not, my facility is equipped for immediate rehoming. She left. Jules watched the truck disappear down the lane and felt the weight of 5 days, or 3, or 7, pressing down like a hand on the chest. Tali looked at the ledger, at the 7-frame stitch instructions, at the moon window where the afternoon light was already slanting toward evening. Tonight or never, Tali said. The lunar cycle is D10 right now. We need to jump through D10 to D16, 7 days in sequence. Before moonrise, Jules said. We have maybe 5 hours. They prepped the workshop like a surgical theatre. Wax thermometer on the workbench, humidity meter on the windowsill, Tali's vibrating metronome strapped to Jules's wrist set to pulse at the target BPM, a stethoscope borrowed from Aunt Mara's nurse kit to listen for the comb's lock frequency. The lunar frames came out of the hives one by one, still heavy with capped honey, each one humming its particular note when Jules held them to the light. The extractor's leather drive belt had cracked earlier that week, whichever week it had been, and they'd replaced it with a jury-rigged length of waxed canvas that slipped occasionally but held. Jules marked each frame with a dot of paint on the top bar, D10 blue, D11 red, D12 yellow, and so on through D16 violet. Corrections, Tali said, reading from the ledger. D10, waxing gibbous, BPM 98.4, warm wax subtracts 1.6, final tempo 96.8. Jules seated the blue frame, checked the wax thermometer, 68 degrees, warm enough, and started, pumping the treadle. The drum spun, picking up speed, the metronome on Jules's wrist vibrating in steady pulses. 96.8 BPM. The comb's hum started low, rose, wobbled, then locked. The workshop tilted and they were there, 5 days ago, late morning, the hives loud with October foragers. Jules tapped the nearest pendulum clock once with a drumstick, a marker, proof of visit, and pulled a single capped cell of honey with a clean knife, dropping it in a labelled vial for humidity calibration. 30 seconds. Back to the extractor. At moonrise in that frame of time, Jules fed the queen, and the room untilted. Back. October 3rd. The week still scrambled. Garbage day Tuesday, clinic Monday. Tali checked the spectrum analyzer. Lock frequency stable. Next. D11. BPM 100.2, minus 1.4 for warm wax. Frame seated, treadle pumping, the metronome pulsing against skin like a second heartbeat. Lock, tilt. This time, early evening, 6 days back, the field bronze with slant light. Clock tap, honey sample, queen feeding, return. The pendulum's tick sounded rougher now, syncopated, as though they were arguing over which beat to follow. D12, 102.0 BPM, warm wax minus 1.5. Jules's legs burned from pumping the treadle, but the rhythm was easy, natural, the tempo a friend. Lock, tilt. 4 days back, Afternoon thunderstorm, rain hammering the roof, bees clustered inside the hive boxes. Tap, sample, feed, return. The workshop smelled like ozone and honey and brass polish. Aunt Mara brought water bottles and watched from the doorway, silent, her own phone's calendar flickering like a candle in wind. D13, 103.8 BPM. D14, full moon, 105.6 BPM. D15, 107.4 BPM. Each jump smoother than the last, Jules and Tali moving like a two-piece band locked into a groove, the extractor's drum singing, the comb's standing wave blooming into chords that made the dust rise and dance. The painted frames swapped in and out, each one heavier than it should be, resonant, alive in a way that had nothing to do with bees and everything to do with the moon's slow pull on tides and time and the architecture of attention. D16, waning gibbous, BPM 109.2, minus 1.3 for warm wax, final tempo, and hope 7.9. The last frame. Jules's hands shook as it seated in the drum, not from fear, but from something else. A sense of standing on the edge of a rhythm too large to hear all at once, but impossible to ignore. Tali's metronome pulsed. Jules pumped the treadle. The comb locked, and the room tilted, and they were tomorrow, or yesterday, or the day after the day before, standing in a workshop that was perfectly familiar and utterly strange because it hadn't happened yet. Outside, Ms. Braun's white truck sat in the gravel lane, empty, and through the moon window Jules could see her walking the hives with a man in a county jacket, clipboard in hand. "Tomorrow's inspection," Jules whispered. "We're seeing tomorrow." "Doesn't matter," Tali said. "Mark it and return. We're almost done." Clock tap, honey sample, and then, as Jules reached for the queen cage, a pounding on the workshop door, heavy and official. Ms. Braun's voice, muffled. "County apiary inspection. Open up." The knocking came from outside the frame of the jump, from tomorrow's timeline, but it bled through somehow, vibration travelling across the locked frequencies. The queen stirred, agitated. Jules held the teaspoon steady, the present-day honey. October 3rd, wildflower and aster, the jar's seal broken this morning in the real now, and let the queen drink as moonrise touched the window's edge. The room shuddered and untilted, and the pounding stopped, not because it had ended, but because it hadn't started yet. Wouldn't start for hours. Back. October 3rd. The moon window showed late afternoon light, the real moon just beginning to climb above the tree line. The 7 frames sat in a row on the workbench, each one tapped and sampled and returned from. They're humming quieter now, harmonising in a chord that was almost but not quite resolved. One more step. Jules took the present-day jar, the October 3rd honey, and held it between both palms, warming it, feeling the wax seal soften under skin heat. Tali watched the moon window tracking the white curve as it cleared the field. 2 minutes, Tali said. BPM doesn't matter for this part, just the honey and the timing. And the queen, Jules said, already moving toward the hives, the jar cradled like something fragile and essential, which it was. The evening air smelled like cut grass and wood smoke. The bees were settling for night, their hum dropping to a low drone, and when Jules opened the hive and found the queen, she was waiting, still, as though she'd known this moment was coming all along. At moonrise, exactly as the first sliver of light touched the hive box, Jules fed her. 1 level teaspoon, the honey golden and thick, tasting of now, of this day, this hour, this breath. The queen drank. The workshop behind them shuddered, a sound like a sigh, and the world clicked into place. Inside, the pendulum clock stopped arguing and found their rhythm. The dust settled in lines that made sense. Jules pulled out the bullet journal and checked the last week's entries, and they were there, solid, real, events landing on the days they belonged to. Garbage collection, Thursday. Aunt Mara's clinic shifts Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday. Tali's physics lab Wednesday morning. The phone's calendar stopped flickering and locked, the dates stable, the week no longer trying to be 7 different things at once. Aunt Mara stood in the workshop doorway, her own phone in hand, and the confusion in her face had smoothed into something like relief. "The medication delivery," she said slowly. "It's scheduled for today, not yesterday, not tomorrow. Today, I remember now, correctly." Ms. Braun's truck arrived the next morning for the county inspection. The man with the clipboard checking hive spacing and mite counts and disease signs, finding nothing amiss. The bees calm and productive and humming their ordinary hum. Ms. Braun watched from beside her truck, eyes narrow, and when the inspector signed off, she left without a word, the white pickup kicking up gravel dust that settled quickly in the still air. Jules labelled a fresh jar of honey, October 4th, wildflower and aster, and scratched into the wax seal, for moonrise only. It went on the shelf beside Alder's other dated jars, a marker for some future emergency, some future need. The extractor got a new belt, proper leather this time, and a tag wired to the drum's hub. BPM is a promise. The lunar frames went back into their hives, still humming, still holding their synodic calendar in cells of wax and time. Tarly made copies of Alder's ledger, scanned every page, backed up the files, and sent one set to the County Historical Society with a note. Beekeeping archive, local interest, methods archaic but effective. The original stayed in the workshop, locked in a cedar drawer with the wax cylinders and the silver feeding spoon. On the wall calendar, Jules wrote across the last 7 days in red pen, kept in time. Not fixed, not corrected, kept like a promise, like a rhythm held steady against the world's inclination to drift. The bees outside worked their ordinary miracles, turning nectar into honey, building comb, feeding the queen, dying and being born in cycles that predated clocks and would outlast them. The moon rose every night at its appointed hour, pulling tides and time in equal measure, and the lunar comb sang softly in the hives, a chord that never quite resolved but never needed to. Jules sat on the workshop steps at dusk, drumsticks in hand, tapping out rhythms on the worn wood. 96.8 BPM, 107.9 BPM, 58.2 BPM for new moon someday when the need arose. Aunt Mara brought tea and sat beside them, not asking questions, just listening to the tap, tap, tap and the distant hum of bees settling for night. The week stretched ahead, ordinary and strange, each day landing where it belonged, and for now, for this moment between moonrise and dark, that was enough. The extractor stood silent in the workshop, its drum empty, patient, waiting. The pendulum clocks ticked in their imperfect unison. The moon window framed nothing but field and sky, and the slow arc of celestial mechanics grinding on, indifferent and precise. And in the hives, the queens laid their eggs in lunar rings, one cell for each day of the synodic month, building a calendar that didn't care what humans called Tuesday or October or now, only that the rhythm held and the comb remembered, and moonrise came when it was called. The next story is about to begin, please relax and enjoy. The storm came at dusk, slamming into the jetty with fists of green water and pulling the sky down low enough to taste salt. Nia had watched it build all afternoon from the harbour master's shed, where she'd been logging tide tables into her phone, tracing the moon's pull across a week's worth of numbers like they were some kind of scripture. She was 16 and had grown up with one foot on planks and the other in charts, reading navigation marks the way other kids read comics, seeing patterns in current and wind that most people mistook for chaos. The harbour was her text. The boats were her alphabet. When the wind finally broke, it left debris scattered along the waterline like offerings. Driftwood. A torn fender, half a lobster pot, and there, wedged against the north piling with its painter tangled in rockweed, a lifeboat. It was old. Paint peeling in long white scrolls, bronze fittings gone green with age, wooden thwarts worn smooth by hands long dead. But the thing that stopped Nia mid-step, phone forgotten in her pocket, was the lantern. Copper, tall as her forearm, mounted on a swivel bracket near the bow. Its glass was fogged but intact, and inside the housing she could see a coil of metal, intricate as jewellery, waiting. Gran Maris came down the path with her cane tapping stones, moving faster than Nia had seen her move in months. The old woman had kept the lighthouse before automation came, before the Coast Guard went digital and left keepers to retirement and memory. She stopped at the water's edge and stared at the boat with an expression Nia couldn't name. Not surprise. Something older. "We should tow it in," Nia said. Gran didn't answer right away. The wind pushed her white hair across her face, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of something rehearsed, something held too long in the throat. "Yes," she said, "we should." They hauled it to the town dock with Nia's dad's skiff, and Gran paid the harbour master to let them moor it overnight. Said it was salvage, said she'd file the paperwork, but when they were alone in the fading light, Gran reached into the lifeboat and touched the copper lantern with fingertips that remembered its shape. "It burns seawater," she said quietly. There's a coil inside that cracks it into flame. Pale fire, cold as starlight. When you light it at night over deep water, the keel leaves a wake you can see from the sky. Nia waited. Gran never spoke like this, never gave away mysteries before they'd been earned. I want you to have it, Gran continued, and I want you to promise me you'll leave it dark. There are old nights out there, girl, nights that still exist if you know how to draw the path. But every door you open shifts the frame. Maps aren't fixed, they're agreements. Break enough of them and home stops being a place you recognise. She pulled a rolled chart from her bag, oilskin yellowed with age, and a bottle no bigger than a flask, dusty glass with a cork sealed in wax. The bottle's label, hand-lettered and faded, read Dawn. This was my grandfather's, Gran said, unrolling the chart on the dock. He was a navigator on the packet ships, drew these before he died. The chart showed open water, no coastline, just compass bearings and depth soundings. But scattered across its surface were spirals, dozens of them, each drawn in pencil with a date beside it in cramped script. Some spirals looped once, tight as a fist. Others unfurled in 2 or 3 slow turns, wide as cartwheel ruts. Margin notes tracked wind, current, star positions. A scale ring in the corner tied spiral radius to hours elapsed. What are they? Nia asked. Patterns, Gran said. If you steer the boat at night so your glowing wake matches one of these, direction, size, loops, and close it precisely, the sea goes dark and you slip through. You arrive at the same place but on the night written on the chart, the date loops. You're there. Nia's pulse kicked. Time travel. Of a kind, not forward, only back, and only on water, only at night. Gran tapped the bottle. This is how you come home. Fill it at dawn from your own shore. When you want to return, pour it over the lantern flame. It snuffs the pattern and brings you to the now. But if you use the wrong water, you'll land somewhere else, a few metres off. A block. It compounds. The map drifts. Drifts. Home moves, Gran said simply. Addresses shift. Parcel lines bend. Streets creep. Most people never notice. They think the old maps were wrong, that memory's faulty. But it's real. Every trip changes the territory. That's why the bottle must be filled at sunrise on the exact beach you mean to return to. Home water. Dawn water. It holds the coordinates. Nia looked at the spirals again, at the careful dates, at the handwriting of a man who'd died before she was born. Her hands itched to touch the chart, to trace the lines, to light the lantern and see what a glowing wake looked like from above. Why are you giving this to me? She asked. Gran folded the chart and pressed it into Nia's hands along with the bottle. Because you're the kind of fool who'll try it no matter what I say. Better you have the rules than learn them the hard way. And because I'm old, and when I'm gone, someone should know the cost. She left Nia on the dock as the last light bled from the sky. Nia didn't wait. She knew she should have. She knew Gran had given her the chart as a warning, not an invitation. But the pull was too strong, the mystery too bright. That night, after her parents were asleep, she walked back to the harbour with a flashlight, the chart and the bottle. The lifeboat rocked gently in its slip, patient as a horse. She climbed in. The copper lantern was cold under her palm. There was a valve at its base, a hose that trailed over the gunnel into the water. She opened it. Seawater hissed into the lantern's chamber, and the coil inside began to glow faint blue, then white, then a colour that had no name, something between lightning and frost. The flame rose without heat, humming like a struck bell. The wake appeared immediately, bioluminescent, milky, trailing behind the keel in a ribbon that didn't fade. It hung in the water like ink suspended in oil, glowing softly, visible even in the dark. Nia cast off. She'd rowed enough boats to know how they moved, how to pull on one oar and push the other to spin in place. She unrolled the chart and chose the smallest spiral, dated last August, just a few months back. One loop, tight, counterclockwise, simple. She began to row. The wake responded instantly, bending as she turned, holding its shape behind her. She adjusted, corrected, watched the glowing line curve in the black water. A quarter turn, half, 3/4. The air grew heavier, the stars brighter. Her breath fogged. She closed the loop, bringing the bow around to meet the starting point, and the wake touched itself, a perfect circle, and the world snapped. Silence. Then sound rushed back, but wrong. Different. Fireworks bloomed over the bay, red and gold, and music drifted from the pier where a crowd had gathered. August, the summer festival. Nia saw her mother, alive and laughing, standing near the bandstand with her dad's arm around her shoulders. Her mother had been dead 2 years. Nia's throat closed. She wanted to call out, to row closer, to touch her mother's hand, but she knew better. Gran's warning echoed. She reached for the bottle, uncorked it, and poured the dawn water over the lantern flame. The light died. The sound cut. The sky blinked, and she was back in the present, floating in the dark harbour under familiar stars. Her hands shook. Her face was wet. She rowed to the dock and tied off, then sat in the boat for a long time, breathing, remembering her mother's laugh, the shape of her smile. It wasn't until morning that she noticed the mailbox. Their house was a 10-minute walk from the harbour, a blue cape with a flagstone path and a cedar mailbox at the street. Nia had walked that path 1,000 times. But when she came home and glanced at the mailbox, something was wrong. It was offset. Not by much, maybe a foot, but it was no longer aligned with the driveway. The stones beneath it had shifted, grass growing in new seams. She pulled out her phone and checked the GPS pin for her address. It was wrong, a metre east of where it should be. She called Ezra. Ezra was a year older, technically 17, but functionally 30 when it came to maps and overlays and drone footage. They'd met in the high school GIS club, which was really just the two of them, and a teacher who let them use the computer lab after hours. Ezra tracked everything, logged coordinates, built change detection models for coastal erosion. If anyone could tell her whether she was losing her mind, it was Ezra. He came over that afternoon with his laptop and a drone in a hard case. They stood in Nia's driveway while Ezra pulled up satellite images, tax parcel, overlays, old property surveys. "Look," he said, pointing at the screen. "This is last month. Your mailbox is here, aligned with the driveway centre line. This is today." He toggled layers. It's moved, and not just the box, the whole parcel boundary. It's bent, like someone pulled it east and it dragged everything with it. "How is that possible?" Nia asked. "It's not," Ezra said, "unless someone resurveyed and didn't tell anyone. But that doesn't explain the Google pin. Pins are crowdsourced, auto-corrected by user data. For it to shift, reality has to shift." Nia told him everything. The lifeboat, the lantern, the chart, the spiral, her mother, the dawn bottle. Ezra listened without interrupting, which was how she knew he believed her. "Okay," he said finally. "We need to test this. Controlled conditions. I'll fly the drone, record the wake from above. You do another spiral, something small, and we'll measure the delta when you get back." They became methodical. Nia would take the boat out at night, light the lantern, steer a spiral from the chart while Ezra filmed from shore with his drone. Each time she closed a loop and slipped through, she'd spend a few minutes in the past, seeing things that were gone, then snuff the flame with the dawn water and return. Each time something moved, a fence angled differently, a street sign rotated 10 degrees, a neighbour's address geocoded to the wrong side of the block. Ezra built a drift model, plotting the deltas, calculating vectors. The pattern was clear. The farther back the date, the larger the spiral, the bigger the shift on return. Small trips moved things centimetres, larger jumps moved them metres. "It's like the map is made of fabric," Ezra explained one night in his basement, showing Nia a simulation he'd built. "Every time you complete a spiral, you pull a thread. The weave tightens in one place, loosens in another. Do it enough, and the whole thing warps." "Can we fix it?" Nia asked. "Theoretically. If you could run a counter pattern, a spiral that mirrors the original but in reverse, it might stitch things back. But you'd need precision, perfect closure, and you'd have to snuff it with water from the exact shore you want to lock home to." Nia thought of the dawn bottle, now half empty. Gran had been clear. It had to be refilled at sunrise on their beach. Home water. But she couldn't stop. The past was too close, too vivid. She started taking longer trips, chasing dates on the chart that promised meaning. A night in the 1930s when pilot whales had beached and the whole town had come to push them back to sea. A rescue in 1895 where a lightship had saved a foundering schooner. Each return brought more drift. The school's address updated wrong in the county database. A paramedic truck took the long route because its GPS believed the road curved differently than it did. People noticed, but they explained it away. Old maps were inaccurate. Surveying equipment had improved. Memory played tricks. Only Nia and Ezra knew the truth. Then Captain Rowe arrived. He showed up at the harbour one morning in a fast rib with twin outboards and a smile that was all teeth. Rowe was maybe 40, tanned and handsome in the way that made people trust him too quickly. He wore expensive foul-weather gear and moved like someone who'd spent his life taking things that weren't his. "Heard you've got a lifeboat," he said to Nia, leaning against the dock piling like they were old friends. "Unusual rig, copper lantern, glows at night." "So?" Nia said. "So I'm a salver," Rowe said. "Wrecks, artifacts, lost cargo. I specialise in finding things that shouldn't be found. And that lantern, that's a tool I could use. It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale," Rowe said. "But I'm not talking about buying. I'm talking about partnership. You've been running patterns, haven't you? Slipping back. I can see the shimmer on the water at night. I know what it means." Nia's stomach dropped. "How?" "I've been looking for a boat like yours for 20 years, Rowe said. "There used to be a dozen. Now there's one. And you have it." He pulled a photo from his pocket, a creased image of a spiral chart. Not Gran's, but similar. "I had a copy made from an old logbook. I've been trying to make it work with modern lights, LEDs, battery arrays. But it never holds. The wake doesn't glow right. You've got the real thing. The copper coil. The seawater burn. Let me use it. I'll pay you. Cash, internship, references, whatever you need." "To do what?" Nia asked. "Salvage," Rowe said. "But salvage that isn't lost yet. Cargo before it sinks. Gold before it scatters. We go back. We mark it. We file claims. Legal. Clean. Just time assisted." "That's theft," Ezra said from behind Nia. He'd been listening from the dock shed. Rowe shrugged. "Maps are suggestions. So's time. If I can get there first, I earned it." "Get out," Nia said. Rowe's smile didn't waver. "You'll change your mind," he said. "Especially when the drift gets worse." He left, but the threat lingered like smoke. Nia tried to stop. She really did. But one night she found a spiral dated 1895, a big one, 3 loops, and she thought of the wreck Gran's grandfather had written about in the margin, a packet ship driven onto shoals in a nor'easter. Survivors none. If she could go back, if she could warn them, steer them clear. She lit the lantern and ran the spiral. It took an hour to complete, fighting current and wind, trimming the wake to match the pattern. When the loop closed, the sea went black as ink, and she was there, storm-tossed, the packet ship a ghost in the fog. She rowed toward it, screaming warnings, waving her lantern. The ship turned. It missed the shoals. It lived. She snuffed the flame and returned to the present. The harbour was wrong. The channel had moved. The main shipping lane, marked on every chart, every GPS, had relocated 100 metres south. Her father's tug contract specified the old channel. It was void. The pier sat over mudflats at low tide. Businesses lost mooring access. The harbour master's office sent emergency updates, but no one understood how it had happened. Nia understood. She had done this. She had pulled the thread too hard. Rowe came back that night. "I can fix it," he said. "Let me have the lantern. I'll run a brute force correction, spiral after spiral until the channel snaps back." "That'll make it worse," Ezra said, showing him the drift model. "You'll knot the whole region. It's not about force. It's about precision." "Then teach me precision," Rowe said. Nia refused, but Rowe didn't need permission. He'd taken a photo of Gran's chart on his phone the day he'd visited. 2 nights later, she saw his Arab out past the breakwater, a crude lantern rigged to his bow, glowing sickly yellow. He was trying to run a spiral. He failed. The wake didn't hold. It frayed, twisted, and when he tried to close the loop, he crossed his own path too early. The wake knotted, a cold whirl forming in the water, a vortex where compasses spun and GPS glitched, and the air tasted like ozone and old salt. The drift spiked, roads bent, buildings geocoded to wrong parcels, an ambulance missed an address and arrived 15 minutes late, a man died waiting. Nia sat on the dock that night, head in her hands, and cried. Gran came down in the dark, slower now, leaning heavy on her cane. She sat beside Nia and didn't speak for a long time. Finally she said, "There's a way to fix it, but you'll have to give up the lantern." "How?" Nia asked. "A counter pattern," Gran said. "The spirals that move the map can stitch it back. You draw a mirror spiral centered on home, and snuff it with dawn water from the exact beach you want to lock. It stitches the fabric tight, pulls the threads back into place, but it has to be perfect. One mistake and you'll make it worse. And after, you can never use the lantern again. The pattern will hold, but only if you leave it alone. Nia looked at the dawn bottle. It was nearly empty. I need to refill it. At sunrise, Gran said. On our beach. Home water. They waited for clear weather. A week of storms rolled through, heavy skies and slant rain that turned the sea grey and opaque. No sunrise, no refill. The drift continued to compound, Rose knot pulling at the edges of reality like a wound that wouldn't close. Then, finally, a morning broke clear. Green flash at sunset the night before, a promise of fair skies. Nia and Ezra met at the beach before dawn, the horizon still dark, the stars fading. Nia uncorked the bottle and held it in the surf, letting the cold Atlantic fill it as the first thread of light touched the water. "Home," she whispered. They sailed before full light, the lantern dark, the charts spread on the thwart between them. Ezra had overlaid the drift model onto a transparency, marked the centre point of the counter-spiral using triangulation. The lighthouse, the bellbuoy, the church steeple. 3 points. A lock. "Radius matches the biggest spiral you ran," Ezra said. 3 loops, counterclockwise. You'll need to compensate for wind and current. If the wake drifts even a metre off the pattern, it won't close. "I know," Nia said. She lit the lantern. The pale flame rose, cold and bright, and the wake began to glow. Ezra launched his drone, the camera tracking from above, feeding the image to a tablet bungeed to the gunnel. Nia could see her own wake from the sky, a luminous thread drawing across black water. She began to row. The first loop was wide, each stroke measured, each adjustment precise. Ezra called headings, keeping her on track, his voice steady. The wind pushed from the west, trying to yaw the boat, but Nia leaned into it, pulling harder on the right oar, letting the current help her curve. 1 loop closed. The wake kissed its starting point and continued spiralling inward. That's when Rose's rib appeared, roaring out from behind the breakwater, spotlight cutting the dark. "He's trying to intercept," Ezra said. "Let him," Nia said, not breaking rhythm. "He doesn't have home water. He can't land where we're going." Roe closed fast, his rib throwing spray, but Nia was already into the second loop, tighter now, harder to steer. The wake glowed brighter as the pattern converged, the spiral pulling inward like a nautilus shell. "Hold your line," Ezra said, voice tight. A gust hit from the north, unexpected, yawning the arc wide. The wake drifted off the overlay by 1/2 metre. Nia swore, shipped the oars, and grabbed the tiller instead, using a back eddy she'd noticed earlier, a pocket of stillness near the bellbuoy. She slipped into it, let the current swing her bow and threaded the gap, bringing the wake back onto the pattern. Third loop, final turn. Rose Arib came alongside and he leaned over the rail, shouting, "You're going to waste it. Let me through." Nia ignored him. The wake was closing, the glowing line spiralling inward to meet its heart. 10 metres. 5. 2. She held her breath, pulled one last stroke, and the wake touched itself at the centre. The sea went black, mirror black. The stars vanished. Nia grabbed the dawn bottle, uncorked it with shaking hands, and poured it over the lantern flame. The water hissed. The flame died. Silence pressed down like a weight, and then the stars blinked back, and the world snapped into place with a sound like fabric tearing and then stitching itself whole. The wake faded. The sea was just sea again. Ezra checked his tablet, overlaying GPS pins, parcel boundaries, street grids. "It worked," he said, voice hushed. "Look, the lines are relaxing, the drift's reversing." Nia watched on the screen as addresses slid back into alignment, as the harbour channel remet its marked coordinates, as fences straightened and roads unbent. Not perfectly. There was a faint warp still visible in the shoreline, a compass rose bend that would remain forever, a signature only they would know. But home was home again. Rose Orib sat dead in the water, engine sputtering. He'd tried to follow them through, but without home dawn he'd landed somewhere else, some other when. His radio crackled nonsense, his GPS showing coordinates that didn't exist. Nia and Ezra rowed back to the dock as the real dawn broke, spilling gold across the water. Gran was waiting. She took the chart, the lantern, the empty bottle, and nodded once. "You did well," she said. They sealed the lantern in a glass case at the Maritime Museum, labelled it a salvaged artefact, said nothing about what it could do. Once a year, on the morning of the summer solstice, Nia and Ezra walked to the beach at sunrise and filled the bottle with home water. They never lit the lantern. They never drew another spiral. They chose to leave the map where it lay, to let home be home, to keep the pattern without pulling the thread. But sometimes, on very clear nights, Nia would walk down to the harbour and look out at the black water, and she would remember the glow, the way the wake had hung in the dark like a promise, the way the past had opened under her hands like a door. She would remember her mother's laugh, the weight of the oars, the hum of the copper flame. Maps she had learned were not fixed. They were agreements, fragile and true, and home was not a place but a pattern you chose to maintain, a spiral you kept closing, a dawn you chose to hold. The sea rolled under the moon, the lantern stayed dark, and the mailbox, for what it was worth, stood exactly where it should, aligned with the driveway, rooted in stone and memory and the kind of truth that only comes from knowing what it cost to bring something back. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy.